Chapter 1235. Han Yunxi picked up the red packet that had fallen beside Rui. It was none other than the one that Rui had stolen. Seeing that his mother was about to take it, Rui hurriedly grabbed a corner of the red packet and refused to let go. Han Yunxi would never have thought that the banknotes in the red packet were all hers. She was both amused and angry. She also grabbed a corner of the red packet and was in a deadlock with Rui. Rui, who gave this to you? She asked. Mother here, Rui said seriously. Han Yunxi thought that Rui was asking for a red packet from her. Last night, Rui had given it to her in the Long Fei Yi, but she hadn't given it to him yet. Baby Rui, wish Mother a happy new year. Mother will give you a big red packet. Han Yunxi smiled. In front of his mother, Rui wasn't the arrogant crown prince. He was just a baby. He knelt on the bed and blinked his big, innocent eyes, saying in a childish voice, Happy New Year. Good boy. Han Yunxi was happy. She turned to take the red packet that she had prepared. It was really a big one. Rui's eyes lit up when he saw his mother bring another red packet. Han Yunxi couldn't help but laugh at her son's little money grubber. She lay on the bed and handed the red packet to Rui. She asked seriously, Baby Rui, Mother wants to ask you a few questions, okay? Okay. Rui had already thrown away the big red packet and was focused on opening the one his mother gave him. Does father belong to mother? Han Yunxi asked. Yes, Rui answered without hesitation. Then does baby Rui belong to mother? Han Yunxi asked again. Even though Rui was counting the banknotes in the red packet with his head down, he was able to multitask. He opened his mouth and shouted with all his might, Yes! Han Yunxi snickered and asked again. Then does father belong to mother? She didn't know if Rui could tell that the difference between the first and third question was the word belong. He still nodded. Yes. Han Yunxi smiled even more mischievously. Then is Rui Bao's mother's? Yes. Rui answered firmly. Han Yunxi immediately asked, All right, Rui Bao's red packets are Imperial Mother's. Rui Bao will give Imperial Mother all the red packets. Imperial Mother will take care of it. All right? All right, Rui answered even more forcefully, but he soon looked up at his mother in confusion. Han Yunxi smiled innocently and reached out to take the red packet. Little Rui hurriedly grabbed 2 red packets and hid under the bed. Not good. Han Yunxi couldn't stop laughing. Almost everyone thought that her son matured early, but in her eyes, baby Rui was a silly baby. Mother won't take the red packet anymore. Can you tell Mother who gave it to you? Han Yunxi pointed at Rui's left hand patiently. Although she didn't count it, she could see that there were a lot of banknotes inside. Long Fei Ye's red packet had already been given. Could it be Gu or Tang Li? According to etiquette, they couldn't give Rui a red packet during the new year. However, there was no such thing as etiquette in number 7 tea house. Of course, they could give it to him. Here, Imperial Mother, answered honestly. Han Yunxi still didn't react, thinking that her son had mixed up the 2 red packets. She carried Rui over and pointed at the red packet in his right hand. This was given to you by Imperial Mother. Who gave you the one in your left hand? Here, Imperial Mother, Rui answered seriously. How did you become so stupid after a year? Han Yunxi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She opened the red packet and took a look. She found that there were 10 banknotes in it. It was really a big packet, just like the one her imperial father gave her. Could it be your godfather? Han Yunxi muttered to herself. Although Tang Li was also a generous person, he wasn't that generous. Han Yunxi called Granny Zhao to help Rui freshen up and change his clothes. After dressing up, she took the big red packet and carried Rui out. Long Fei Yi and the others were waiting for them at Tianxiang Pavilion to eat together. When Han Yunxi came over, everyone was discussing why Rui was afraid of Long Fei Yi. Long Fei Yi didn't want to talk about it first, but Gu asked him about it early in the morning. Tang Li and Ning Jing also knew about it. Tang Li kept talking in his ear, which was even more annoying than Gu. Han Yunxi came over. She was gratified and heartbroken to know that Rui hugged Long Fei Yi last night. Sister-in-law, did you go to bed early last night? You didn't even know that Rui was in such a mess? Tang Li asked. Yes, Han Yunshi replied in a low voice. She glanced at Long Fei Yi. Unfortunately, Long Fei Yi was also looking at her with a teasing smile. Han Yunshi quietly stepped on him, but Long Fei Yi was calm, as if nothing had happened. Rui knew that everyone was talking about him, but he didn't quite understand what they were talking about. At this moment, he was competing with little Tang Tang with his eyes. Little Tang Tang was staring at his big red packet, and he returned a look of disdain. Little Tang Tang continued to stare, and he returned a warning look. Little Tang Tang was still staring, so he narrowed his eyes and stared back. The two children were flirting with each other and didn't pay attention to what the adults were saying. Gu was silent for a while, then suddenly slammed the table seriously. Long Fei Yi, do your work. Leave this to me. I'll take Rui to Sky Mountain. If that doesn't work, I'll take him to the mysterious continent to find Han Chun. Long Fei Yi didn't answer. He just stared at Gu's serious expression. Gu said that he would maintain a serious attitude at first, but after being stared at by Long Fei Yi for a long time, he felt more and more guilty. In the end, he turned his head away to avoid Long Fei Yi's gaze. He pursed his lips so that he wouldn't give himself away and said seriously, "No matter what, we have to get to the bottom of this as soon as possible. Okay, take him away in a few days." Long Fei Yi actually agreed. Gu Qixiao gave a start before breaking into a smile. He turned back and asked, "Really?" Long Fei Yi replied expressionlessly, "Not really." Han Yunshi and the Tongning couple were a little nervous at first, but when Long Fei Yi said this, the three of them all burst into laughter. Gu's face darkened. "Cold," he said. "Long Fei Yi, you're busy with work. Where will you find the time to take Rui to Sky Mountain? It's not the end of spring yet, so I can't go up. Hanshin will arrive in Cloud Realm before the Qingming Festival. He's prepared the best spring tea in Cloud Realm for him. I don't need to look for him. He'll come to me himself," Long Fei Yi replied. Only then did everyone know that Long Fei Yi and Han Chun had written letters. Han Yunshi, his biological daughter, didn't like Han Chun. Why did Long Fei Yi hit it off with Han Chun? It wasn't that Long Fei Yi wasn't worried, but that everything about little Rui was normal. Gu Beiwei had checked on him a few times and said there wouldn't be any problems. Gu was resentful and speechless. Han Yunshi was planning to take Rui to Sky Mountain herself, but now that Han Chun had come to Cloud Realm Continent, she didn't need to make another trip. Han Chun should know more about the lust bite energy than old Kenzo. After all, his strength far surpassed the lust bite energy. With little Rui around, Han Yunshi and Long Fei Yi didn't like to talk about it. Little Rui more or less knew what they were talking about. Long Fei Yi quickly changed the topic to help his son get a red packet. "Tangli, where's your red packet?" There were many rules in the palace. So few people were allowed to give red packets to Rui. Here at number 7 Tea House, everything was done according to seniority. Tangli couldn't skimp on his red packet. Tangli was long prepared. He carried little Tang Tang and sat in front of Rui with a smile. "Rui do you want a red packet? Happy New Year." Rui's earnest tone made everyone laugh. Tangli happily handed over the red packet. Gu had already given little Tang Tang a red packet. He scooted over to Rui's side and crouched down to stuff something into his pocket. Rui wanted to take it out, but Gu quickly stopped him. "Shoo, hide it well," he said in a low voice. "Look at it tonight. Otherwise, it'll be stolen." Rui immediately looked at little Tang Tang warily and didn't dare to move. Gu gave Rui the same thing he gave him last year. While Rui was happy to receive the red packet, Han Yunshi was stunned. "That's weird." She picked up the big red packet in Rui's hand and asked, "Who gave this?" Little Tang Tang's gaze finally moved away from Rui and followed the big red packet. The adults didn't notice it, but when Rui came over, she noticed that the red packet was very big. It was bigger than all the red packets she had received before combined. She had been very sensitive to banknotes since she was young. Only then did everyone notice the big red packet. Long Fei Yi asked curiously, "What's going on?" "I found it on the couch today. It should have fallen from him. 10 banknotes worth 1,000 taels." "Who gave it?" Han Yunshi was a little uneasy. Other than Long Fei Yi, who was a big spender, everyone gave out red packets for the new year, just for luck. Who would spend so much money? There was no one else in number 7 tea house. Suddenly, Han Yunqi was stunned. She thought of something. She had given 10 red packets with such a large amount of red packets before. Those 10 red packets were for the 4 duchesses, the 3 generals' wives, and the 3 first-ranked titled madams. None of those women were easy to deal with. Han Yunqi quickly took out all the banknotes from the red packet and looked at the bank that had given them. They were all from Kingan Bank. Now half of Han Yunqi's world turned black. The banknotes she had prepared for the red packets were all from Kingan Bank. These 10 banknotes were the ones she had put into the red packet yesterday. There was no mistaking it. Little Rui was completely unaware of the trouble he had caused. He was still looking at little Tang Tang, guarding against her snatching his big red packet. Han Yunqi looked at Long Fei Yi and muttered, "Trouble." After midnight last night, she had ordered the maidservants to send out all the red packets. They would arrive in Yuning by tonight, right? No matter what, it would be too late to stop them. She had given those madams big red packets because she couldn't be bothered to fight with those senseless old women. She wanted to bet on their mouths and let them have a peaceful new year. Now, she couldn't even imagine the expressions of those old man's people when they received the empty red packet shells. Long Fei Yi knew that Han Yunqi had prepared 10 big red packets. He took a banknote and looked at it. He knew what was going on. Han Yunqi was dumbfounded. Long Fei Yi couldn't help but laugh. Chapter 1236. Rui actually stole money. After Han Yunqi explained the situation, not only did Long Fei Yi laugh, but Gu and Tang Li also couldn't help but laugh. It was the first day of the new year, and Rui was caught stealing money. Tang Li coughed lightly and said seriously, "Brother, you can't spoil him for stealing money. You must teach him a lesson." Long Fei Yi, Han Yunqi, and Gu all glared at him, including Ning Jing. Did a child who wasn't even a year old know what money was? Little Tang Tang understood and casually stared at the red packet. Rui didn't understand. It was his first time receiving a red packet this year, and it was even his first time seeing banknotes. Previously in Yuning Palace, he had only seen Han Yunqi and Long Fei Yi reward the servants with broken pieces of silver. Long Fei Yi was about to speak, but Gu was the first to flare up. He stared coldly at Tang Li. "Say that again." Tang Li was a fellow with a short memory. As soon as he had a daughter, he started showing off. He'd already annoyed Long Fei once. If this kept up, heaven knows if Long Fei would kick it back to the Tang clan. I was just joking. You guys don't be so serious. Tang Li's mouth twitched. He was afraid of these people. It's not to the extent of stealing money, but it's certain that he stole something, Long Fei Yi said objectively. Tang Li was convinced by this, and so was Ning Jing. Although Han Yunqi didn't want to admit that her precious son had stolen things, she still nodded. If it was a daughter, she could spoil her a little. But when it came to her son, she should be ruthless. However, Gu was indignant on behalf of Rui. How could a child who wasn't even a year old distinguish so clearly? Rui didn't take things from outsiders. He might not even care if they were given to him. He had only taken his mother's things. Did he know what these things were for? Would he be able to tell whether it was his mother's or his? Gu took Rui from his arms and let him sit on his lap. He was so angry that he didn't want to speak. It was fine if Tang Li made a joke, but Long Fei Ye's attitude. Was it necessary? Rui was confused. He knew the word steal, but he didn't understand it very well. In the past, if there was something I didn't understand, I would look to Grand Tutor. Now that Grand Tutor wasn't here, he looked to Imperial Father and Imperial Mother. Long Fei got up and walked over. He squatted in front of his son and asked seriously, "Rui, do you know what steal is?" Rui nodded. Long Fei asked again, "Then do you know what fight is?" Rui shook his head. "Rui, don't take things that don't belong to you no matter how much you like them. Got it?" Long Fei said seriously. Perhaps Rui would understand better if he used the word take. Sure enough, Rui nodded. Long Fei smiled and said, "But you can fight. If you win, it's yours." Hearing this, Gu Qixiao, who was about to refute Long Fei, shut up. He agreed with Long Fei Ye's last sentence. If you like something, fight for it. Fighting was a great skill. Who do you fight with? How do you fight? Can you fight? On what basis? What is the bottom line of the fight? What comes after fighting is abandoning and cherishing. Rue didn't understand these things even now. However, Long Fei knew that he would have to teach him in the future. Perhaps he would teach more. Perhaps Han Yunxi would teach more. Perhaps Gu Beiwei would teach more. He was good at fighting in the dark, Han Yunxi was good at fighting in the open, and Gu Beiwei's realm might be higher. He won without fighting. It was easy to fight for the world, but difficult to defend. How much fighting was hidden in the word defend? Rue was the crown prince, the first person to defend the country. Rue still had a lot to learn. His path had just begun. Long Fei didn't know that Rue had taken the money. He was just using this to teach her a word fight. Perhaps Rue didn't understand, but at least he knew and remembered this word. Rue repeated after Long Fei. Yes, fight. Long Fei immediately ordered for a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone, and wrote a large fight word on the spot. Rue had already learned to read. Seeing the unfamiliar word, he came over and asked, Imperial Father, fight? Long Fei only nodded and didn't say anything else. Lay at the side, looking at the word seriously and memorizing it. It was all thanks to Gu Beiwei that he could learn to read at such a young age and develop such good habits. Perhaps the most precious thing Long Fei had given his son wasn't Cloud Realm, but Gu Beiwei. Although little Tang Tang could understand and speak many words, she hadn't even started learning to read yet. She hadn't received much education and had been raised by her grandmother and Annie Ling for the first year of her life. All she did was play. After she turned a year old, she followed her mother for a few months, running to the mountains to plant flowers or staying by her parents' side to watch her father fiddle with hidden weapons and her mother work on the abacus. She looked at the big word written by her imperial uncle and began to read it in a low voice. Fight. Ning Jing hadn't found it strange when she saw Rue's early maturity. After all, Long Fei and Han Yunxi were his parents, so it was normal for him to grow up early. But now that Rue had learned to read before he was even a year old, Ning Jing was truly surprised to see Long Fei teach him like this. 3 years old looked like an adult. The teachings before 3 years old had a subtle influence, and it was the influence that was most easily overlooked. Tang Li spoiled his daughter to the heavens, protecting and doting on her. Ning Jing was a mother for the first time and had never seriously considered Tang Tang's upbringing. She couldn't count on Tang Li anymore. No matter if I'm in the Tang clan or wandering the outside world, no matter how bad my relationship with Tang Li becomes, my daughter's education will always come first. On the first day of the new year, under Tang Li's suggestion, everyone disguised themselves and brought their children to a nearby town to join in the fun. The two children had never seen such a lively scene before and were extremely excited. Since they were happy, the adults were naturally happy too. As for the empty red packets, Long Fei said to Han Yunxi, let it be. Let's see how those old man people react before we discuss it. Han Yunxi knew that she would have to face annoying things after returning to the palace. However, she still had a lot of fun these few days. On the 4th day of a new year, Long Fei was ready to set off for Yuning Palace. At the beginning of the country's founding, there was a pile of government affairs entangled with him. In addition, the disaster in Northern Li hadn't been alleviated yet, so he couldn't leave for too long. Brother, Ning Jing and I will stay for a few more days before looking for you, Tang Li said with a smile. Gu was on their roof. When he heard this, he rolled his eyes and didn't say anything. This tea house was his. What was the use of Tang Li asking about Long Fei? Long Fei personally tidied up a few urgent letters as he answered. You can ask her. This tea house belongs to him. Gu liked hearing this. He was happy and hung down from the eaves to look into the house. He saw Tang Li carrying little Tang Tang and running to Rue. He asked nicely, Nephew, can Uncle Li and Aunt Jing stay here? Rue was folding paper. He ignored Tang Li and glanced at little Tang Tang before continuing with his work. Baby Rue, you guys go home first. Uncle Li will stay here, okay? Tang Li asked again. Rui turned around and still ignored Tang Li. He asked little Tang Tang seriously, Tang Tang, are you a mouse? Tang Tang? Mouse. Han Yunxi and Ning Jing looked over, puzzled. You're the mouse. Little Tang Tang was angry. Rui didn't argue with her. He wanted to yield to this little sister. He didn't understand why this little sister was so clingy. She was so clingy with the little thing, and the little thing also stayed in the Grand Tutor's arms every day. He hadn't seen her come down from her father's arms these past few days. Little Tang Tang didn't know what Rui was thinking. She was innocent. Her father liked to hug her and held her in his arms all day. She couldn't do anything about it. Rui couldn't be bothered with her anymore. When Tang Li asked a few more questions, Rui simply covered his ears. Looking at Tang Li's defeated expression, even Ning Jing wanted to laugh at him. Tang Li suddenly hoped that Long Fei Yi would have a daughter soon. He wanted to see how Rui would treat his biological sister. At this time, Long Fei Yi looked back and said seriously, Tang Li, go to Yuning as soon as you arrive. Rui will be 1 year old in a while. It's up to you whether to invite your father or not. The Tang clan held 2 positions. One was in charge of the military equipment, and the other was in charge of the construction of the imperial capital and palace. Both of these were important matters. The construction of the imperial capital and palace would come to an end. As for the military equipment, as long as the country existed, so would the equipment. He didn't want the Tang clan to fall into chaos. He also didn't want Tang Zijin to be impeached by the imperial court, because he was busy with the construction of the imperial capital. There were many people who coveted the benefits of the military equipment, and Bailey Yuanlong was one of them. Long Fei Yi was the first to know that Bailey Yuanlong had colluded with the Southern Army. Although he hadn't exposed it or done anything to this day, he knew everything in his heart. Bailey Yuanlong would probably never know how stifled and uncomfortable his heart felt. Bailey Yuanlong was different from the others, and the Bailey army was different from the other military factions. The Bailey clan was once his most trusted clan, as well as the one he relied on the most. Bailey Yuanlong had endured patiently with him for more than 10 years, accompanying him from Tianing's civil strife to Cloud Realm Continent's chaos, to the recent establishment of the Great Qin Empire. But now, he was the person he had to be most wary of. The history books all said that when the birds were gone, the bow would be put away. When the cunning rabbit was dead, the hounds would be cooked. Those whose achievements overshadowed their masters would die. But how many times did the emperor have no choice but to be forced into a corner? Those whose achievements overshadowed their master's ambitions. If Bailey Yuanlong had colluded with other military factions, he could turn a blind eye to it. But those people from the Jiangnan military faction couldn't obtain the position of empress or gain any benefits. Instead, they were forced to provide grain for disaster relief. They had long harbored thoughts of rebellion. Tang Li still hadn't figured out the meaning behind Long Fei Ye's words, but Long Fei Ye's serious tone was enough to put Tang Li on guard. He stopped joking around and nodded seriously. All right, I'll go with you. Long Fei Yi glanced at Gu, who was hanging upside down by the door. Gu suddenly felt a little nervous, thinking that Long Fei Yi was going to take him back to Yuning Palace as well. But Long Fei Yi said, "Don't block the way, get out of the way." Gu's face darkened, and he was so angry that he almost fell over. He flew to the roof and sat down, thinking to himself that it was fine if Long Fei didn't invite him to Yuning Palace. He just so happened to have time to go to Jiangnan to find some good tea. Han Qin liked preaching Ming tea, didn't he? He'd definitely find something better than Long Fei Yi. Gu left number 7 tea house first, followed by Long Fei Ye's group. The spring festival had ended early. When they returned to Yuning Palace, there were several big troubles waiting for Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi. Chapter 1237. By the time Han Yunxi's group returned to Yuning Palace, it was already the 6th day of the new year. They arrived at night, but Long Fei Yi didn't even have time to rest before heading to the imperial study. There were plenty of memorials to the emperor waiting for him to deal with. Han Yunxi and Rui had no idea when Long Fei Yi returned to his quarters. In any case, when mother and son woke up the next day, Long Fei Yi wasn't there. Han Yunshi had long gotten used to his busy schedule, so this wasn't even his busiest time. Even when they were in the same palace, she and Rui wouldn't see him for 2 to 3 days. Han Yunshi walked out the door and looked at the palace. She couldn't help but think of the time when she lived at the Duke of Qin's estate. Long Fei Yi had been busy back then as well, so she often went days without seeing him. Now that she'd finally seen him, he'd come looking for trouble with a cold face. Yuning Prefecture was the temporary capital city and the liveliest place in Cloud Realm Continent. The inner city was filled with nobles, civil and military officials, while the outer city was filled with commoners. The madams and young misses of the inner city organized all sorts of banquets to recite poems, compose poems, admire flowers, and write lyrics. Almost every banquet had amusing or scandalous news to spread and become the butt of jokes. If there were only 2 kinds of people who were invited to every banquet, one would be the most popular and the other would be the least popular. Han Yunshi had been the least popular back in Tianning's capital city. Everyone wanted to see her make a fool of herself. Now she was the woman no one dared to invite. Since no one dared to invite her, she was happy to stay in the palace and play with her baby Rui. That was one of life's greatest joys. On Tang Li's first day in Yuning, he took Ning Jing and little Tang Tang to a temple fair in the outer city. Han Yunshi didn't go with them. She was waiting for the 10 old man's men to make trouble. She hadn't even returned to the palace when she confirmed that the 10 empty red envelopes had all been delivered to the old man's men. She even specifically asked a maidservant and a eunuch who handled this matter. The maidservant sent the red packets to Yuning Palace by Eagle. The eunuch took over and arranged for them to be distributed. When the servant girl counted the red packets, she noticed that there were 10 red packets without banknotes. When the eunuch went to each manor to distribute the red packets, he also noticed the 10 empty red packets. However, the 2 of them didn't dare to say anything. They all thought that the Empress did it on purpose. How could Han Yunshi blame them? Han Yunshi originally thought that as soon as she returned to the palace, the old man's people would come to her door. However, as the days passed, there was still no movement from this matter. If it was other people who received an empty red packet, they would be terrified and would not dare to say anything. They would only nervously try to figure out the Empress' intentions and reflect on how they had offended the Empress. However, the 10 madams were different. It would be strange if they didn't seize this opportunity to teach Han Yunshi a lesson. However, Han Yunshi waited for 2 days, but there was no movement from the group of madams. Han Yunshi was puzzled and became more cautious. She also didn't take the initiative to mention this matter. She quietly waited and observed the changes. The 9th day of the new year was coming. The 9th day of the new year was Xianyuan Rui's first birthday. It was the first birthday of his life. Long Fei Yi originally planned to hold a banquet for his first birthday. The invitations were also sent out. However, who knew that a few days after he returned to the palace, bad news came from Northernly. Northernly, an avalanche. Originally, the disaster had not been alleviated. After the beginning of spring, as the weather warmed up, there were several small-scale avalanches. Many herdsmen were killed or injured. It was unknown what man-made rumors said that the emperor wanted to give up Northernly. The entire Northernly could be said to be shrouded in a pessimistic atmosphere. On the night of the 8th day of the new year, Tang Li and Ning Jing rushed back from the outer city. Tang Li directly rushed to Long Fei Ye's imperial study. He leaned on the table and asked, "Brother, tomorrow is Rei-er's first birthday banquet. What do you plan to do?" Northernly had an avalanche. The country was in trouble, and the people were in trouble. If they held a big banquet for celebration, how many people would talk about it? Not to mention Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi. Even little Rui-er, who didn't know anything, would be condemned. Long Fei Yi raised his head from a pile of memorials and asked seriously, "You invited your father?" "Brother, I'm asking you something serious. The common people outside the city are talking about how the herdsmen in Northernly can't eat, but you want to hold a banquet for the crown prince. Brother, those people are looking for an opportunity to criticize the crown prince. Don't harm Rui." Tang Li said seriously. Tang Li knew about the open and secret struggle between Bailey Yuanlong and his father. However, he didn't know much about the current situation and didn't understand it well enough. He originally didn't pay attention to this matter and even prepared a very special gift for Rui Er. However, when he went to the temple fair in the outer city, he heard all kinds of rumors and slanders. He was so angry that he directly rushed back and didn't care about anything else. Ning Jing chased after him with little Tang Tang. Seeing Tang Li so impudent, she was about to speak when Han Yunxi stopped her. To have a younger brother like Tang Li who dared to rush here and slam the table with Long Fei Yi was also a kind of fortune for Long Fei Yi. When fighting for the country, everyone was loyal. When it came to defending the country, those who fought for fame and fortune were also fighting for it with all their hearts. That was then, and this is now. Otherwise, the words protecting the country wouldn't be so difficult to write. As the head of the Tang sect, Tang Li was also in the circle of interests. However, Han Yunxi knew that Tang Li would never change. Do you have any good ideas? Long Fei Yi asked seriously. Tang Li thought for a long time before replying. Cancel the birthday banquet and celebrate it with her in private. The reason why there were so many rumors outside was because tomorrow was the 9th day of the new year, and Long Fei Yi still hadn't released the news of canceling the banquet. Ning Jing couldn't help but step forward and bow. Your Majesty, this subject's husband thinks of canceling the banquet and donating all the expenses in the name of the crown prince to the victims of the northernly disaster. This way, all the ministers will have to follow suit. Canceling the banquet at this time would appear insincere and would show that the emperor and empress were afraid of those who spread rumors. However, in the current situation, the banquet had to be canceled. Thus, Ning Jing thought of this idea as a way to make up for it. Long Fei Yi raised his eyebrows and looked at Tang Li. In my opinion, I can rest assured that your wife will be in charge of the Tang sect in the future. In front of Tang Li and the others, Long Fei Yi had never put on airs and didn't refer to himself as Your Majesty. Tang Li was proud that Ning Jing could come up with this idea. As long as Ning Jing was willing, he could also hand over the affairs of the Tang sect to Ning Jing without any reservations. It was a pity that he didn't have the final say in the Tang sect. His father still controlled the Tang sect's elders. Tang Li sat to the side and muttered, "She and I are both running away. Why should we care about the Tang sect?" Long Fei Yi casually threw down 2 booklets. Tang Li caught them and looked at them. His face immediately lit up. One of the booklets was from the Ministry of War, and the other was from the Ministry of Works. The Ministry of War complained that the Tang sect hadn't received the first batch of weapons they were supposed to deliver at the beginning of spring. The Ministry of Works complained that Tang Zijin hadn't returned to the imperial capital since he returned to the Tang sect in the 12th lunar month. Because of Tang Zijin's absence, the construction of the imperial capital had been delayed for several days. The Ministry of Works and the Ministry of War both pointed their spears at the Tang sect. However, they didn't take into account how many more booklets would come after these 2 booklets and how many people would covet the Tang sect. These 2 reports were enough for Long Fei to force Tang Zijin's hand. Tang Zijin was definitely still busy with the weapons at the Tang sect. Ning Jing had always been in charge of those weapons. Because they were second-hand modifications, there were many things that Tang Zijin didn't know about. It was very difficult for him to take over. As for the imperial capital, Tang Zijin had to personally oversee the construction of the imperial city. Without Tang Zijin, there was no progress in the construction of the imperial palace. It was difficult for Tang Zijin to do 2 things at the same time. He couldn't split himself up. Tang Li carefully read the 2 booklets and said, "Big brother, it's time to test my father." If Tang Zijin knew that Tang Li had said such a thing, he would probably be so angry that he wouldn't recognize him as his son. However, this was the truth. It was time to test Tang Zijin. Now, there were only 2 paths in front of Tang Zijin. The first was to compromise with Tang Li and Ning Jing. He would bring the couple back and have Ning Jing continue to be in charge of the weapons while he returned to the imperial capital as soon as possible. The second was to find someone else to take over the Tang sect's weapons. Tang Zijin naturally knew that many people in the imperial court were eyeing the lucrative job of weapons. The Tang sect had made many enemies because of this. If he was willing to give up the profits and find someone else to take over the weapons, the Tang sect would definitely attract many collaborators and allies. They might even become a major faction. In fact, if Tang Zijin extended an olive branch to the southern military, many of them would very likely cast Bailey Yuanlong aside and cooperate with the Tang sect. What choice would Tang Zijin make then? On one hand, he would accept Ningjing and leave the Tang sect without descendants. On the other hand, he would accept foreign aid and form a faction. It had to be said that this was an extremely difficult choice for Tang Zijin. However, it was precisely such a difficult choice that could test Tang Zijin's sincerity. Ningjing's expression turned serious. Tang Li, this heartless thing, was actually still smiling. Han Yunshi said, "Tang Li, whether you and Ningjing return or not is the Tang sect's business. The weapons are an important matter for the imperial court. Now, it can be said that your family's business and the imperial court's business are mixed together. It's up to you to decide how to use these two booklets. I'll do what needs to be done." Tang Li didn't hesitate. He withdrew his smile and said seriously, "Sister-in-law, I also want to know if my father will become a second Bailey Yuanlong." Long Fei had been waiting for these exact words. He didn't deal with this matter publicly. Instead, he ordered someone to send the two memorials directly to the Tang sect for Tang Zijin to see. Tang Zijin was a smart man. He knew what to do as soon as he saw the memorials. Han Yunshi asked jokingly, "Tang Li, Ningjing, if the birthday banquet is canceled, will you still give a gift?" "Of course. I've already prepared it. Tomorrow, we'll celebrate Rui-er's birthday ourselves." Tang Li smiled at Rui-er, who was flipping through a book. "Crown Prince, you'll definitely like tomorrow's gift." Rui-er glanced back and didn't react much before burying his head back into his book. He didn't understand, but he liked reading those words. Tomorrow's birthday banquet won't be canceled. The banquet will go on as usual, and the gift will still be received. Han Yunshi said with a smile, "This is my son's first birthday. I want to make a big deal. Let's see what those people can do to us." Tang Li and Ningjing were shocked. Her Majesty the Empress was so willful. Was it really all right? Chapter 1238. Han Yunshi's willfulness stunned Tang Li. He blurted out, "Sister-in-law, are you stupid? Did you really say that?" The most discussed rumor in the outer city was what Han Yunshi had just said. She said that all the ministers were advising against canceling the birthday banquet, but the Empress said that the Crown Prince's first birthday must be celebrated in a big way. Han Yunshi rolled her eyes at Tang Li. "You're the stupid one. Empress, you want to force them to donate to disaster relief at the birthday banquet?" Ningjing asked. She knew that Han Yunshi wasn't that stupid. Not only that, Han Yunshi sneered. She had Ningjing and Tang Li come closer and whispered to them. Long Fei already knew about Han Yunshi's plan tomorrow. He watched from the side and couldn't help but laugh. The infighting in the imperial court was really boring. Occasionally, Han Yunshi, the Empress, would stir up this big pool. It was a kind of pleasure. Tomorrow's birthday banquet should be very interesting. That night, before Long Fei went to bed, he personally flew over the eaves and vaulted over the walls to check all the roofs in the palace. However, he didn't see Gu's figure. Although he didn't let Gu come back with them, he still sent someone to give him the invitation to Rui-er's birthday banquet. Wasn't this guy coming? Although Gu said that number 7 tea house was to be given to Rui-er, he hadn't officially given it away yet. At the very least, he had to bring the deed over. Han Yunshi could stir up trouble, but Gu was even more so. If he didn't show up, tomorrow's birthday banquet would really lose a lot of fun. That night, the palace was peaceful. However, the inner and outer cities of Yuning, and even the entire Great Qin Empire, were all paying attention to the palace. They were all waiting to see if the palace would send out a message to cancel tomorrow's birthday banquet. Bailey Yuanlong was the most concerned about this matter. In the dead of night, Bailey Yuanlong was having a secret meeting with Xiao Dong, the commander of the Southern Army. Xiao Dong had just turned 40 this year, and was a full 16 years younger than Bailey Yuanlong. However, he was older than Northern Commander Jin Zi, Western Commander Chu Tianyin, and Eastern Commander Luo Tuesday. Xiao Dongwen couldn't plan, and he couldn't even defend himself in martial arts. In the Southern Army, where there were so many talented people, he was actually a useless person. However, Xiao Dong had a powerful background. Xiao Dong was a member of the Xiao clan, the head of the southern clans. When Long Fei Yi was still at the top of Tian Shan Mountain, Patriarch Xiao was invited to the Medical City Conference and openly opposed Gu Beiyue, who supported Han Yunxi. The Xiao family had set their sights on the position of the Empress a few years ago. It would be strange if they didn't oppose Han Yunxi. Long Fei Yi had wanted to settle this debt long ago. If not for Gu Beiyue stopping him, Long Fei Yi would have found an excuse to wipe out the Xiao clan after he became the emperor. It had to be said that the Xiao clan's influence in the south was enormous and complex. A slight move in one part could affect the whole situation. Once Long Fei Yi took control of the Xiao clan, the south would fall into chaos. Currently, the western, northern, eastern, and central regions were in a state of post-war reconstruction. Whether it was in terms of finances or food, most of the people had to come from the south. The south couldn't fall into chaos. The Southern Army had seized this opportunity to act so impudently. Of course, the Southern Army supporters, the major clans behind the scenes, were all very smart. They knew that Long Fei Yi was slowly making plans for the south, so they had to take advantage of this opportunity to gain more power and allies for themselves. Xiao Dong was only a spokesperson chosen by the major clans of the south. He was very different from Bailey Yuanlong. However, the two of them had many common understandings. First, they both felt that Long Fei Yi had been too hasty in appointing Jin Zi, Chu Tianyin, and Luo Tu as commanders. Jin Zi and Chu Tianyin weren't even 30 yet, while Luo Tu was the nephew of Kangon Private Bank's shopkeeper Luo. He had just turned 30 last year. According to Xiao Dong and Bailey Yuanlong, these three brats weren't even fully grown yet. What could they accomplish? Second, their spearhead was Han Yunxi. The Southern Army's ultimate goal was the position of Empress. The son of the Empress was the heir apparent. Thus, to put it more bluntly, they hoped that the crown prince, or even the future heir apparent, would be on their side and seek greater benefits for their clans. Bailey Yuanlong wanted nothing more than for the Southern Army to grow stronger and seize the position of Empress. In his opinion, as long as the Southern Army grew stronger, the Emperor would need him even more. He would have no choice but to rope him in. After all, from the looks of it, only the Bailey clan could contend with the Southern military faction. Bailey Yuanlong and Xiao Dong sat across from each other on the tea couch. They had been chatting for a long time, waiting for news from the palace. Although it was a private meeting, they were still courteous to each other. After all, they didn't treat each other with sincerity. They were both fighting for benefits, so they were both on guard against each other. After a long silence, Xiao Dong probed, "Sir Bailey, it's already so late. In my opinion, there shouldn't be any news from the palace, right?" What was he probing for? He wanted to know if Bailey Yuanlong had any informants in the palace with Long Fei Yi or Han Yunxi. All the civil and military officials of the imperial court wanted to bribe the people in the palace to find out some information. Unfortunately, it was very difficult because Long Fei Yi didn't have a harem. Only he and Han Yunxi lived in Yuning Palace, so they didn't need many servants. Xiao Dong pondered. Bailey Yuanlong was the former second-in-command of the East Qin camp, so he must be familiar with Long Fei Yi's trusted aides. Even if he couldn't bribe the people around the two masters, he should at least have some informants in the palace, right? As for whether Bailey Yuanlong had any informants in the palace, only he knew. Bailey Yuanlong replied, "Let's wait a bit longer. If there really isn't any news, then that's fine." Thus, the two fell into silence again. But after a while, Xiao Dong couldn't hold it anymore. "Sir Bailey, if the Empress insists, then the two of us will have to advance and retreat together tomorrow." They had already agreed that if the birthday banquet wasn't canceled tomorrow, they wouldn't mention it in the morning court. Instead, They would remonstrate and denounce the Empress in front of all the congratulatory guests. After all, it was the Empress who had said that it had to be a grand affair. Of course, Bailey Yuanlong nodded calmly. The two of them would definitely wait a bit longer. Unfortunately, it was almost dawn, but there was still no news of the banquet being canceled. Since it was time to go to court, Xiao Dong couldn't stay any longer and got up to leave. After sending Xiao Dong off, Bailey Yuanlong sat down and drank a few mouthfuls of strong tea to sober himself up. At this time, a woman close to 30 walked out from behind a curtain. Although she was a bit old, she was born with a dignified beauty that could captivate even birds and beasts. She had the air of a lady from a noble family, enough to make people forget her age. This woman was none other than Bailey Mingxiang's eldest daughter, noble consort Xiao, who had been undercover in Northern Li for many years. She'd risen from a small palace made to become the favored consort of the Northern Dynasty's emperors, and Bailey Mingxiang's older sister. She'd hidden herself very deeply in Northern Li for a very long time. Even when Northern Li fell into civil strife, she didn't leave the Northern Dynasty's emperors. She followed them all the way to the north until she learned that the Northern Dynasty's emperors had committed suicide. She'd stolen many of the Northern Li imperial family's treasures and knew the situation in Northern Li like the back of her hand. She even had many trusted aides in Northern Li. Bailey Yuanlong was a martial artist. When he'd followed Long Fei Yi in the past, he'd been as stubborn as a rock. But now, he'd managed to hook up with the southern generals precisely because of his daughter's help behind the scenes. Bailey Lixiang had toiled in Northern Li's palace for so many years. How could her shrewdness and methods be simple? The Bailey clan had sacrificed so much for the East Qin imperial family. In her eyes, Long Fei Yi should have at least made her father a prince and let her younger brother inherit the title in the future. That way, the Bailey clan would always enjoy the treatment of a prince. But not only did Long Fei Yi refuse, he even listened to Han Yunxi's words and divided the military power into 5. He even gave Han Yunxi the highest military power. The Bailey clan had followed Long Fei Yi the longest and sacrificed the most. Why shouldn't they enjoy special privileges? She and her father still couldn't accept that Long Fei Yi would give the Western military power to the Nether clans Chu Tianyin and the Black clan Jinzi. In their eyes, this was a very risky and foolish move. It was digging one's own grave. Father, you should go rest. As I see it, this matter isn't so simple. It's best to be careful tomorrow. Bailey Lixiang was shrewd and cunning, but she was also a filial daughter. She didn't seek benefits for herself, but even if she had to die, she'd do it for her father and her brothers. The notion that a woman should sacrifice herself for her family was branded in her heart and would never be erased. How could Bailey Yuanlong be in the mood to rest? In front of Xiao Dong, he was calm and collected, but in front of his daughter, his anxiety was completely exposed. Lixiang, how can father sleep? Tomorrow, Xiao Dong and I will join forces to persuade her. What if? Father, there's no what if. As long as Han Yunxi dares to make a big deal of it, she won't be able to turn things around this time. I'm not only convinced a few ministers, but also many commoners. Everything should be ready by now. As soon as the banquet starts, those commoners will definitely block the 4 city gates. Also, Father, Han Yunxi was in the wrong in the first place. I don't believe the Northern Li military will lock her up. Bailey Lixiang said seriously. Bailey Yuanlong nodded. His daughter's comforting words made him feel much more at ease. Father, do you remember when Han Yunxi used Tianning's Empress Dowager's birthday banquet to raise donations? Bailey Lixiang asked. Hearing this, Bailey Yuanlong grew nervous again. Could it be that this time Father, don't worry. Daughter has already made preparations. Even if she raises donations, daughter can still deal with her. Bailey Lixiang's lips curved into a cold smile. In the candlelight, she truly looked like a viper. What method? Bailey Yuanlong asked hastily. Bailey Lixiang whispered something in his ear, causing Bailey Yuanlong to look surprised. Is there really such a thing? I've personally paid a visit to all 10 madams. It can't be faked. Bailey Lixiang replied in a low voice. Only then did Bailey Yuanlong relax. He had been very nervous before, but now he was looking forward to it. He couldn't wait for the birthday banquet to start as soon as possible. You should rest early too. It's your first meeting with the Emperor tomorrow, so you have to rest well, Bailey Yuanlong said seriously. I still have to go pick up my little sister later. She should be arriving in Yuning soon. Bailey Lixiang couldn't help but complain. That girl Mingxiang really doesn't know any better. Instead of thinking of a way to stay in Yuning, she ran off to become an army doctor. Chapter 1239. No one mentioned the Crown Prince's birthday banquet during the morning court session on the 9th. Some didn't dare to bring it up, while Bailey Yuanlong purposely didn't mention it. The focus of the morning court session was still on the northerly snowstorm, as well as the revision of the tax uniform. The impact of the tax system was widespread and involved the interests of all parties. Long Fei wasn't in a rush to change the rules, but simply tossed a rock onto the surface of the lake to test its depth. After the morning court session, Long Fei returned to the imperial study as usual. The so-called morning court session was just the ministers bringing up the matters they wanted to report, the emperor bringing up the matters he wanted to do, and everyone discussed it. The real place to make decisions wasn't the Crepe Myrtle Hall, but the imperial study. As soon as Long Fei arrived at the imperial study, a group of ministers followed him and asked for an audience. When Long Fei returned to the imperial study, Han Yunxi and Rue had just woken up. Rue and Tang Tang got along very well on the way back from the number 7 tea house. Although Rue didn't pay much attention to others, the two could still stay in the same place and play on their own. After handing the children over to the servants, Han Yunxi and Ning Jing began their inspection. In order to prepare for the birthday banquet, Han Yunxi had been secretly busy for a few days. Last night, she and Ning Jing worked until very late before going to bed. Ever since she put on the Empress Phoenix coronet, she still hadn't put on the airs that an empress should have. Since the people below didn't like her so much, she naturally had to take this opportunity to show them that she, Han Yunxi, wasn't qualified to be the empress of the Great Qin. The birthday banquet was held in the Great Qin Hall on the west side of the imperial residence. Apart from the Crepe Myrtle Hall, the Great Qin Hall was the largest hall in the imperial residence. The hall was circular and open on all 4 sides. It could accommodate 100 people. When Han Yunxi and Ning Jing arrived at the Great Qin Hall, the servants had already set up the venue. The hall was circular, and the seats were arranged in a rectangular arrangement. The east side was the main seat, and behind the main seat was a large screen. On the left and right sides of the main seat were several separate secondary seats. Next to the secondary seats were rows of seats. There were 3 rows on the left and right, and each row could accommodate 10 people. Other than that, there were no other special decorations in the hall. Ning Jing deliberately counted and whispered, 7 secondary seats. What kind of rule is this? Most banquets were very particular about the seating arrangements, not to mention the Crown Prince's first birthday banquet. Those who could sit in the second seat had to be of high rank. Even Shi and Tang Li didn't have the qualifications to do so. Han Yunxi turned around and said, Long Fei Yi. Ning Jing didn't react for a moment. She didn't understand until Han Yunxi dragged her to the kitchen. Han Yunxi meant that Long Fei Yi was the rule. In the kitchen, all the delicacies were prepared. Han Yunxi opened a lid and took a look. She immediately closed it and revealed a satisfied smile. She instructed, serve the dishes according to the order I listed. Don't make any mistakes. The steward eunuch quickly nodded. Rest assured, Your Highness the Empress. This old servant understands. The 2 most important things in a banquet were the venue and the dishes. After Han Yunxi looked through them, there were no problems. She found Zhao Mama and asked in a low voice, How's the matter? Don't make a mistake. Rest assured, Your Highness the Empress. This old servant is the best at this kind of thing. When that girl came over, this old servant knew that there was something wrong with her. Zhao Mama smiled treacherously. Ning Jing watched Zhao Mama's sinister expression from the sidelines and mused to herself. Heaven knows how bad an old court lady like Zhao Mama would be if she hooked up with a bad master. If Han Yunxi handed all the palace maids over to her, she would definitely be able to sit back and relax. The first birthday banquet was set to start in the evening. After dark, those who were invited all enter the palace. Who dared to be late for a banquet held by the emperor and empress? Although there were many people who objected to the empress holding a grand banquet, most of the people who came brought big gifts. As the time for the banquet approached, most of the seats were filled. The main hall was bustling with noise and excitement. The invited officials, madams, and young misses were all chatting in groups of 3 to 5. Even so, everyone was still thinking about the 7 empty seats below the main seat. According to the rules, the emperor and empress were first, followed by the imperial relatives and nobles with titles, and then the ministers. There were only 5 types of titles in the Great Qin Empire: Wang, Gong, Hobo, and Nan. Those who were qualified to be invited to the palace were only Wang and Gong. The Wang titles were further divided into Qin Wang and Jun Wang. Qin Wang was also known as Wang. Generally, they were the emperor's blood brothers. Jun Wang were mostly Wang of the opposite sex. Those who had made great contributions were qualified to be conferred the title. The duke titles were also divided into 2 types, Guogong and Jun Wang. They were also used to confer titles to those who had made great contributions. In terms of status and nobility, Qin Wang was higher than Jun Wang was higher than Guogong, and Guogong was higher than Jun Wang. Generally speaking, those with truly noble status were Qin Wang. Even some Jun Wang might not be able to sit on the secondary seat, let alone Guogong and Jun Wang. However, the situation in the Great Qin Empire was different. In the Great Qin Empire, only Gu held the title of Wang. He was Qin Wang Yu. The title of Jun Wang was vacant. As such, those who held the title of Wang appeared to have a much more noble status. The Great Qin Empire had 4 Guogong. They were Guogong Bailey Yuan Long, Guogong Changshao, and Guogong Zhou Qi Chu, and Guogong Ding Kalin. Among them, apart from Bailey Yuan Long, who held the position of military commander in the central region, the other 3 did not hold any positions in the imperial court. However, their influence was great. Shaoan was none other than Jiangnan's Shao family's patriarch, Shao Dong's uncle. He had contributed a lot of provisions to the army in the central region. During the plague in northern Li, he had contributed the most provisions. Guogong Zhou Qi Chu was originally a marquis of Western Zhou. Because he had led the soldiers and civilians to surrender, he was exempted from the battle in Western Zhou and was thus given the title of Wang. As for Guogong Ding Kalin, he was the owner of a large grassland in northern Li and controlled the best grassland in northern Li. During the chaos of the plague, he had voluntarily surrendered and saved the victims. As a result, he was given the title of Wang. The title of Wang wasn't given to a single person. It was a glory and status bestowed upon a family by the emperor. The matter of Wang was not only a reward based on merit, but it was also a form of appeasement, roping, and exploitation. For example, although Long Fei Yi wanted to get rid of the Shao family, he had to give the title of Wang first. At the very least, he had to appease the Shao family and stabilize the Jiangnan region. According to the rules, the secondary seat below the main seat was given to those with titles. Thus, according to the Great Qin system of Wang, apart from Gu, the 4 Guogong all had the right to sit there. However, Bailey Yuan Long and the other dukedoms were arranged to sit behind the secondary seats. At this moment, Bailey Yuan Long and Shaoan were both staring at the 7 empty seats, the displeasure written all over their faces. Tang Clan Master, Madame Jing has arrived. Suddenly, a eunuch's loud voice rang out, causing everyone to fall silent. The Tang clan could be said to be a very special existence. The members of the Tang clan didn't have titles or official positions. Even if they controlled weapons, they didn't have military ranks. The status of being a member of the Tang clan was actually quite awkward. Moreover, when Long Fei Yi paid respects to his ancestors, he didn't confer his mother the title of Empress Dowager. Consort 1 could only be considered Consort Dowager. The Tang clan was Consort Dowager's maternal family, so this status really didn't count for much. Not to mention others, even Bailey Yuan Long looked down on the Tang clan. Everyone was silent as Tang Li's family of 3 walked into the main hall under everyone's watchful eyes. Tang Li actually held Ning Jing's hand in one hand and little Tang Tang's in the other. Quite a few elders furrowed their brows and secretly cursed him for being unruly. Tang Li led Ning Jing and little Tang Tang to the secondary seats in a carefree manner. Now the hall was even quieter. Everyone exchanged glances, and quite a few people looked towards the forward wagon. Tang Li's family of 3, sitting in the secondary seats, was clearly looking down on the forward wagon's status. Bailey Yuanlong wasn't calm at all. He was about to stand up when Bailey Li Xiang, who was sitting behind him, quickly held him back and whispered, "Father, don't be impatient. Look at clan head Xiao." Only then did Bailey Yuanlong sit back down and ask politely, "Tang clan head, why don't I see your father?" Tang Li was playing with his daughter when he looked over and feigned ignorance. "Official Bailey, what business do you have with my father?" Old man saw that His Majesty left a seat for the imperial uncle, so he thought he'd come. Bailey Yuanlong laughed. As soon as Bailey Yuanlong mentioned imperial uncle, many people laughed. At this moment, Xiao Dong, who was sitting across from them, looked at Lord Chun, the Minister of Appointments, and smiled. "Lord Chun, when did we get a first-rank official? Why didn't you announce it? It's not good to hide something like this from everyone." Imperial uncle was both a form of address and a first-rank official's title. In terms of title, Tang Zijin was Long Fei Ye's uncle, so naturally he could be the imperial uncle. But in terms of titles, Long Fei Yi hadn't given Tang Zijin a first-rank official's title, so Tang Zijin couldn't be called the imperial uncle. Bailey Yuanlong's words were mocking Tang Li for not having the right to sit in that position. If Tang Zijin was sitting here today, he'd definitely take these words as a form of humiliation. But to Tang Li's ears, they were trying to drive a wedge between them. His big brother had only given Gu Qixiao the title of Qinwang while leaving the title of Junwang empty. There had to be a reason why he demoted Bailey Yuanlong and the rest to the rank of Guogong. There had to be a reason why he hadn't given any titles to the Tang sect. Although he didn't know why, he had to believe in his older brother. Ning Jing was inwardly furious, but she didn't say anything. Firstly, it wasn't convenient for her to say anything due to her background in the Ning clan. Secondly, as a woman, it wasn't appropriate for her to speak up in this kind of setting. Although Tang Li could see that these people were trying to sow discord, he couldn't find the words to refute Bailey Yuanlong's words. He couldn't say that his father hadn't been invited, could he? No matter how much internal strife there was in the Tang sect, it was still a family matter. When faced with an external enemy, they had to be united. Tang Li wasn't stupid enough to trick his father in front of outsiders. The Minister of Personnel, Lord Chun, didn't dare to say anything. Bailey Yuanlong laughed loudly. It looks like the imperial uncle won't be coming. Old man was planning to have a drink with him, hee. Xiao Dong immediately echoed. General Bailey, it looks like you're wrong. His Majesty's position isn't reserved for the imperial uncle. After all, Tang Li had never had a direct confrontation with this group of scheming and calculating people. He was quite angry and was about to explode. At this moment, the eunuch's loud voice came from outside the door. His Highness the Crown Prince has arrived. His Highness Prince Yu has arrived. Chapter 1240. The Crown Prince came? The Prince of Yu, Gu Qixiao, came too? For a moment, everyone looked outside the hall, very surprised. Everyone thought that the Crown Prince would come with the Emperor and Empress, who knew that he would come with Prince Yu first. This group of people was fighting for a position here, but when the Crown Prince and Prince Yu came, what Duke, what Imperial Uncle, all the positions were lowered. Tang Li's face was originally full of anger, but when he heard the announcement, he was immediately overjoyed and happy. In terms of poisonous tongue, he was absolutely poisonous to the people present, but his awkward status was not to be refuted. However, when Gu came, it was different. Gu was the only prince of Great Qin. He was the head of all the titles. Gu's identity was also brought out, and everyone present had to lower themselves. For the first time, Tang Li found that he could also like Gu so much. Before the Crown Prince and Prince Yu came in, everyone had already stood up. When the Crown Prince and Prince Yu came in, everyone knelt down. This was the etiquette of this place, and Tang Li and Ning Jing were no exception. Long live His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Long live His Royal Highness Prince Yu. Gu was wearing a brand new red robe, which was specially inlaid with gold. He wore a lot of gold ornaments. Even his hairpin was gold. Red and gold together, it was as tacky as it could be. However, he was able to wear these two colors with a sense of gold and luxury. He was as showy as he could be. This was specially ordered for Rue's first birthday banquet. He did not care about Northern Li. Anyway, it was his godson's birthday, so he must make the place as big as possible. The bigger the better. It must be lively. In fact, he could have arrived in Yuning last night, but because of this set of clothes, he was delayed for a night. Little Rue was sitting on Gu's right shoulder. He was wearing the purple robe his mother had specially prepared for him, looking extremely noble. Although he was young and had an immature appearance, he sat high above on Gu's shoulder and looked down at the people kneeling on the ground. He did not show any fear. Instead, his cold and lonely face was filled with a heroic spirit that made people not dare to look directly at him. Everyone remained kneeling as they waited for their masters to tell them to rise, but little Rue didn't say a word. Meanwhile, Gu Qishao simply treated everyone as heir. All of their attention was on Tang Li's family of three. Gu carried Rue through the kneeling crowd and stood in front of Tang Li. He squatted down and asked suspiciously, "Tang Li, what are you doing?" Tang Li looked up and said seriously, "Salute." Gu Qishao placed little Rue in the main seat, then picked up little Tang to sit on one side. Rue immediately jumped down from his seat and squatted in front of Tang Li, looking at him with his head tilted. Everyone was kneeling, but they secretly looked up at the Crown Prince, not understanding what he was doing. However, when Rue spoke, everyone was shocked. Rue asked curiously, "Royal Uncle, Imperial Father said you don't have to kneel to me." Royal Uncle, not to mention the people below, even Tang Li and Ning Jing were calm. Although Royal Uncle was not a title or an official, it was just a form of address. However, the title of Royal Uncle was far more special than Imperial Uncle. In the words royal relatives were the relatives of the royal family, the emperor's in-laws. Imperial relatives were the emperor's external relatives, the family of the concubines. The imperial uncle was considered an external relative, but royal uncle was an internal relative, the closest relative. This identity was much more honorable than any title present. If Long Fei Yi made Tang Li king, Bailey Yuanlong would definitely object and ask for a throne for his son. However, called Tang Li royal uncle, so Bailey Yuanlong had nothing to say. Royal uncle was the purest form of address. If Rue wanted to call Tang Li royal uncle, this was Rue's business and the royal family's business. None of the kneeling people were related to the royal family. They were all outsiders, so who dared to say anything? Who had the right to say anything? If Bailey Yuanlong wanted to complain, he could only blame himself for not being related to the royal family. Long Fei's move had caught everyone by surprise, but none of them could oppose it. From today onwards, the Tang sect will be placed in a special position because of Tang Li's identity. The corners of Tang Li's mouth lifted, and he almost laughed out loud. His brother had put in a lot of effort. He had given him such a great benefit, and yet he had hidden it until now. He immediately pulled Ning Jing to her feet and sat back down in a dignified manner. "Io, Lord Bailey, Lord Shao, the two of you are truly impressive. Both of you can see through His Majesty's intentions. His Majesty really didn't plan on leaving a seat for the royal uncle. Not to mention Bailey Yuanlong and Xiao Dong. Even Duke Chengwugong Xiao's face was gloomy and very unhappy. Tang Li sat in the secondary seat as the royal uncle, so it was perfectly justified. With his status, Tang Li was much more spirited. He cleared his throat and said loudly, "Crown Prince, it's time for the ministers to rise." Rue had really forgotten about this matter. He wasn't used to it. Usually, when he met the people below, he would meet with his imperial father and imperial mother. When his imperial father and imperial mother told him to rise, he basically never did. Gruner returned to the main seat and said in a childish voice with a serious expression, imitating his imperial father, "All rise." "Thank you, Your Highness," everyone said in unison and stood up one after another. They just stood there, not daring to sit. Gruner was a little confused and looked at Tang Li. Tang Li was smug and cleared his throat again. "Ahem, Crown Prince, it's time for the ministers to be seated." Only then did Rue understand. With a domineering attitude and a childish voice, he ordered loudly, "Everyone, sit down." Everyone was stunned. What was with the Crown Prince's attitude? Although they were dissatisfied, they had to cooperate. If it was normal for everyone to be seated, they would have said, "Thank you, Your Highness." However, the Crown Prince had given the order, so everyone could only nod. "Yes, Your Highness." Looking at the minister's helpless expressions, Ning Jing almost laughed out loud. She finally saw through it. This scene looked like child's play and even a little ridiculous, but in reality, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were letting Rue take the ministers down a notch. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were reminding everyone, especially Bailey Yuanlong and Xiao Dong, that the imperial family's authority was not to be challenged, and their orders were not to be disobeyed. If Bailey Yuanlong and Xiao Dong didn't know how to restrain themselves, Long Fei Yi wouldn't reason with them anymore. He wouldn't follow the rules and would directly suppress them with his imperial power. Although Jiang couldn't fall into chaos right now, and although Bailey Yuanlong had a large number of troops, Long Fei Yi just didn't want war to break out again. It wasn't because he was afraid, and it wasn't because he couldn't deal with them. Even an outsider like Ning Jing could see Long Fei Yi's intention of letting Rue go first, let alone the others present. After taking their seats, everyone looked at each other in dismay. Bailey Yuanlong and Xiaoan exchanged a few glances. Unfortunately, Bailey Yuanlong didn't quite understand Xiaoan's thoughts, and Xiaoan didn't know what Bailey Yuanlong was thinking either. It wasn't appropriate for them to speak openly in this place, and with the Crown Prince here, it was even more inappropriate for them to leave. Sitting behind Bailey Yuanlong, Bailey Lixiang saw her father and clan head, Xiao, exchanging flirtatious glances, but she didn't understand Xiao's intentions either. After a while, she stepped forward and whispered, "Father, His Majesty must have sensed that we're in contact with the Xiao clan. As I see it, we should put off the matter with Northernly for now." Clan head Xiao should be thinking the same thing. Bailey Yuanlong would listen to his daughter. But the matter of the birthday banquet is all the Empress's fault. This concerns the hearts of the people. We can't miss it. Bailey Lixiang whispered again. Bailey Yuanlong thought it made sense and nodded. "All right, we'll follow the original plan." At first, everyone was chatting in small groups, but once Gu and Rui arrived, they couldn't speak carelessly. Gu Qixiao never cared who was present. He carried and little Tang Tang over and had them sit on his left and right thighs, chuckling as he teased them. Now that Tang Li was the imperial uncle, he suddenly felt lonely at the top. With no one to provoke him, he was bored, so he brought over grapes and peeled them one by one, giving them to Ning Jing to eat. All the civil and military officials in the court looked at them quietly, no one daring to make sound. If the Crown Prince was older, they could still flatter him. But he was only 1 year old. What could they flatter him for? They could only tease him. Who would dare? As for Tang Li, he just clashed with Bailey Yuanlong and the Xiao clan. Anyone who bumped into him now might end up as a punching bag. As for Gu, even Bailey Yuanlong and clan head Xiao didn't dare speak to him. As a result, everyone could only wait and wait. There was still an hour before the banquet began. Finally, someone came to save everyone. This person was none other than the Grand Tutor and head of the Imperial Physician Courtyard, Gu Beiwei. Grand Tutor Gu has arrived. Upon hearing the eunuch's announcement, he immediately jumped down from Gu's lap and rushed out as fast as he could. Soon, everyone saw Gu Beiwei walk in. He was still the same, wearing snow-white robes and a calm and gentle expression. He was clearly a warm person, like the spring breeze in April, but after looking at him for a long time, he was like the lonely moon in the late autumn sky, high and far, unreachable. Rue hung on Gu Biyue's back, rubbing his neck intimately. Bailey Yuanlong was convinced of Gu Biyue's strength, even though he was a descendant of a Shadow clan. As for clan head Shaoan, who had opposed him in Medical City, he was not only convinced, but also fearful. The two of them often thought how good it would be if Gu Beiyue wasn't a descendant of the Shadow clan and wasn't Han Yunxi's subordinate. When Gu Beiyue arrived, the tense atmosphere disappeared. Most people stood up and bowed to Gu Beiyue. Gu Beiyue also politely returned the greeting. The Grand Tutor's rank wasn't high. Gu Beiyue bowed to those of a higher rank than him, and he was also very respectful to the four Wadukes. The four Wadukes all stood up and responded politely. Gu Beiyue had just arrived and hadn't rested for a day and night. As soon as he arrived, he heard that Gu Enrich had arrived first. He didn't even have time to see Long, Fei Yi, and Han Yunxi. He didn't even have time to rest and change his clothes before coming over. Gu and Tang Li were people who didn't mind making things worse. Moreover, Rue was such a young child. How could he not worry? Chapter 1241. As soon as they saw Gu Beiyue arrive, both Gu and Tang Li were delighted and rose to their feet to welcome him. Gu Beiyue was a smart man, so his lips curved into a smile at the sight of the 7 secondary seats. He knew exactly what was going on. Although his official rank wasn't low, he still carried Rue on his back and openly sat down by Gu's side. The position of Grand Tutor was a unique one. In different countries and dynasties, their statuses and responsibilities differed. Some Grand Tutors were equivalent to the Prime Minister of a country. As the teacher of the Emperor, they could even manage the court in his place when the Emperor was young. Some Grand Tutors simply taught the Crown Prince to read and understand, but weren't allowed to involve themselves in court matters. Still others had no real power and were nothing more than an empty title. For example, Tianning's Crown Prince Long Tianma's position of Grand Tutor was held by Tianning's Prime Minister. In truth, the Prime Minister didn't specifically assist the Crown Prince, but only occasionally gave him advice. The Grand Tutor of the Great Qin Empire was a 4th-rank official. Gu Beiyue not only taught the Crown Prince to read and understand, but was also allowed to teach him about politics. If Long Fei Yi promoted the Grand Tutor to a 1st-rank official position, heaven knows how busy Gu Beiyue would be. Would he be able to escape unscathed from the various factions in court? As a 4th-rank official, Gu Beiyue didn't have any real power. He could easily refuse anyone's attempts to form a clique and extricate himself from the complicated struggles between factions. From an outsider standpoint, he could evaluate the high officials more objectively. He didn't have any real power, but his words to the Emperor now and the Crown Prince in the future carried a lot of weight. It was said that the words of a lowly man carried little weight, but Long Fei Yi did the exact opposite. He used this method of low position, little power, heavy words to protect Gu Beiyue from being dragged down by the various factions. It also ensured that Gu Beiyue's advice to him and the Crown Prince will be more objective and impartial. Once the Crown Prince grew up, Gu Beiyue would be assisting Long Fei in teaching him how to judge court affairs. He'd have to judge everything from national policies to memorials. Gu Beiyue's standpoint and position would be crucial. Gu Beiyue was a 4th-rank official, but his position as the Crown Prince's teacher was special. No one present dared to express dissatisfaction with him sitting in the 2nd seat. When he saw Rue hugging Gu Beiyue without letting go, Gu was filled with envy and jealousy. While Rue wasn't paying attention, he suddenly carried Rue down and let him sit in the main seat again. Rue immediately glared at him fiercely. That gaze was exactly the same as the one Long Fei Yi used to glare at Gu. Gu Beiyue narrowed his eyes and looked over disdainfully, just like how he looked at Long Fei Yi. Gu Qixiao and Rue glared at each other until they were at odds. However, Gu Beiyue was shocked. He quickly carried Rue back and whispered, "Rue, you can't sit in the main seat in front of outsiders." It's a big taboo. Fortunately, the banquet hadn't started and Ru was still too young. No one present noticed this, or looked up and asked softly why. You'll understand when you have brothers in the future, Gu Beiwei replied softly. Just remember it. Grand Tutor will explain it to you in the future. Okay. Rui was always so obedient in front of Grand Tutor. Gu Beiwei carried Rui to the first seat below the main seat. He half knelt in front of Rui and said softly, "Sit properly, Rui Remember, the seat on your father's right is yours. No matter what happens, unless your father agrees, you can't change your seat." Rui nodded and asked again, "Why?" "Grand Tutor, what do you sit?" "Grand Tutor will tell you when you're older." Gu Beiwei thought for a moment and stretched out his pinky with his back to the crowd. "Rui Grand Tutor will promise you that as long as you don't change your seat, Grand Tutor will always sit behind you. I won't change my seat either, okay?" Rui didn't hesitate to hook his pinky finger with Gu Beiwei's for a pinky promise. He said, "I want to make a promise with Father too." Gu Beiwei smiled and almost reached out to rub Rui's head. However, he didn't. He retreated to his seat and sat down properly. At this time, Shaoan retracted his gaze. He originally wanted to let the crown prince sit in the main seat for a while before making trouble. Who knew that Gu Beiwei would come at such a coincidence? In this kind of situation, the crown prince sitting in the main seat could be a big or small matter. If it was a small matter, it would be a child being immature. If it was a big matter, it would be the Empress and Grand Tutor's fault. Although Xiao Dong and Bailey Yuanlong were prepared to impeach Han Yunxi, Shaoan had a bad feeling about today's situation. He didn't know what Bailey Yuanlong meant when he kept winking at him just now. He pondered that he would have to remain indecisive and act according to the wind. The Crown Prince and Grand Tutor each took one seat. In addition to Gu, Tang Li, and Ning Jing, there were only 2 seats left. Little Tang Tang was different from Rui. She was held in Tang Li's arms and didn't have a seat to herself. After Gu Beiwei took his seat, many officials started chatting with him. Everyone had endless things to say to Gu Beiwei. It wasn't that they had topics to talk about with Gu Beiwei, but that they had many questions to ask Gu Beiwei. Chatting was two-sided, while asking for advice was one-sided. In terms of real chatting, only Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi had enough brain power to chat with Gu Beiwei. The atmosphere in the hall finally improved. Everyone wasn't so bored anymore. At first, Gu Qixiao listened on the side, but soon grew bored. The questions these officials asked were all things he didn't understand and wasn't interested in. He wanted to tease Rui but Rui ignored him. Rui listened attentively to every word Gu Beiwei said. Although he didn't understand most of it, he liked listening to Grand Tutor speak. Apart from Imperial Father and Imperial Mother, Grand Tutor's voice was the best. Finally, the bored Gu got angry. Seeing that one of the officials was about to speak, he snatched the chance to pull Gu Beiwei over and whispered in his ear, "Your Excellency Gu, did you receive your lordship's wedding gift?" Seeing this, the people below didn't dare to interrupt and could only wait. "I have received it." Gu Beiwei was very calm. "Have you seen it?" Gu asked again. "I saw the cover." Gu Beiwei didn't blush and his heartbeat didn't accelerate. He answered honestly. Gu Qixiao purposely glanced at him before he chuckled. "Do you like it?" Gu Beiwei also smiled. "Thank you for the gift." Gu looked deeply at Gu Beiwei, his face full of suspicion. This guy was such a gentleman, gentle and refined. How could he talk about that without blushing? "Gu Beiwei, I heard that Qin Min got pregnant not long after you got married. You're really something." Gu smiled ambiguously, but Gu Beiwei replied seriously, "I know a thing or two about obstetrics. Qin Min is very familiar with it." Gu spat out the tea in his mouth. Fortunately, it didn't spray on Gu Beiwei. One obstetrics thing. No wonder Gu Beiwei was so calm. He actually attributed that thing to obstetrics. Gu looked at Gu Beiwei without moving. After a while, he rolled his eyes at Gu Beiwei. "You medical nerd," Gu Beiwei said seriously. "Seventh young master, you can ask me if there's anything you don't understand in the future." Gu was dispirited and didn't want to talk to Gu Beiwei at all. Boring. Gu Beiwei sat back down with his head lowered. She bit her lip and smiled unconsciously, feeling a little embarrassed. Unfortunately, it was only for a short while, and Gu didn't notice. Grand Tutor Gu, where's your Qi Min? Is she here with you? Is she in the residence? Tang Li asked. Tang Li was the imperial uncle, so Ning Jing was also a relative of the imperial family. Naturally, she had the right to be seated. However, Qi Min was only Gu Beiyue's family member and didn't have the right to be invited. He didn't want to seek treatment for Ning Jing. He really didn't care how many children Ning Jing could give him. Moreover, his sister-in-law had already asked Qi Min about Ning Jing's condition, and Qi Min had also determined that it was incurable. Tang Li only wanted to see what Qi Min looked like. Gu Beiyue's taste was almost on par with his elder brother's. Qi Min should be an unusual woman no matter what. Is Madame Min feeling better? Ning Jing also asked. Not very well. She's still recuperating in Jiangnan. Time is too tight, and I can't bear to see her rushing about. Gu Beiyue replied indifferently. Is there anything wrong? Ning Jing was a little puzzled. She had been pregnant before, so she knew a lot about the situation. Gu Beiyue and Qi Min were both doctors. How could they not be able to deal with a small pregnancy reaction? It's nothing serious. She's just afraid of the cold. Gu Beiyue quickly changed the topic and chatted with the ministers below. The Fort Wagong, several first-rank officials, and generals were all very quiet. No one took the initiative to chat with Gu Beiyue. They were all trying to figure out who would take the remaining 2 seats. No matter how they thought about it, there were no imperial relatives in the imperial family, and no one in the imperial court was qualified to take a seat. These seats weren't randomly placed. No one could figure out the emperor's intentions. Many people even guessed that the emperor might confer 2 Junwang titles during the crown prince's birthday banquet. Finally, the eunuch outside the door shouted again. This time, the main characters had arrived. Your Majesty, Her Imperial Highness the Empress has arrived. Everyone stood up nervously and walked out of their seats to kneel in greeting. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi both wore purple luxurious clothes. Even in this kind of occasion, Long Fei Yi didn't forget to hold Han Yunxi's hand and intertwine their fingers. After the 2 of them took their seats, Long Fei Yi said, My beloved subjects, rise and take your seats. Everyone stood up and took their seats. The hall became even quieter. Everyone was waiting for Long Fei Yi to ask the eunuch at the side if everyone had arrived. However, Long Fei Yi didn't ask. He left the 2 secondary seats empty and turned to ask Eunuch Li, Prepare to start the banquet. We think everyone should be hungry. Yes. Eunuch Li respectfully retreated. Not long after, 2 groups of palace maids filed out from the left and right sides of the main hall. Each of the palace maids held a tray of food. On the tray were very exquisite porcelain dishes. The dishes were covered, and the dishes couldn't be seen. However, just by looking at these dishes, it was enough to see how sumptuous today's banquet was. At this time, the Bailey father and daughter sneered. They couldn't wait for today's banquet to be more sumptuous. Chapter 1242. One by one, the palace maids filed out, serving delicacies and fine wine to every guest present. All the palace maids were dressed in the same festive colors. They had clearly been trained, their footsteps light as if they were dancing. The procession seemed to have been quietly rehearsed, one in and one out. The speed was balanced, elegant, and orderly. The originally undecorated hall became lively and festive because of the dance of the palace maids. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi sat high up in the main seats. Long Fei Yi, who always had a cold and solemn expression, had a faint smile on his lips. He should be in extremely good mood. Han Yunxi was actually not a person who liked to smile, but ever since she became the empress, she basically wore a harmless smile when she appeared in public. How many people in the court wanted to see her cry? So how could she not smile? At this moment, Han Yunxi's smile was very bright. Looking at the palace maids coming in and out, watching the empty tables gradually being filled with large and small tableware, she became more and more satisfied. She turned back to look at Gu and asked with a smile, Prince Yu, how is this place? This empress has carefully prepared for several days, and also spent a lot. When Han Yunchi said this, all the officials looked over. Almost everyone thought that the Empress would say, spend a lot of money. However, Han Yunchi said, also spent a lot of effort. Ah, good, excellent. Gu Qixiao replied as he clapped. If this place was prepared by someone else, he would definitely dislike it for not being grand enough, lively enough, or gorgeous enough. However, as long as it was prepared by Poison Lass, it was the best in the world. Imperial Uncle Li, what do you think? Han Yunchi asked again. No one can match the Empress's taste, Tang Li said with a smile. Of course, how can the Crown Prince's first birthday banquet be shabby? Han Yunchi pretended to be proud. Not to mention Bailey Yuanlong and the Xiao family, even the other two dukes, as well as those officials who had always respected the Empress and supported the Crown Prince, were dissatisfied. The herdsmen of northern Li were still in dire straits. There was not much food in the national treasury that could be used for disaster relief. The common people spontaneously organized disaster relief. Han Yunchi was the mother of the country and the birth mother of the Crown Prince. How could she hold such a lively banquet at this critical juncture? Of course, everyone was angry in their hearts, but they didn't dare to say anything. Seeing the Empress look towards Gu Beiyue, everyone became expectant and waited for the Empress to ask Grand Tutor Gu. Everyone hoped that the Grand Tutor could speak out their grievances and persuade the Empress, or even the Emperor, who spoiled the Empress too much. Bailey Yuanlong's old face was gloomy and his heart was filled with anger. If it weren't for his daughter's constant persuasion, he would have stood up to denounce Han Yunchi as soon as she arrived. At this moment, he stared coldly at Gu Beiyue. He wanted to see how Gu Beiyue would evaluate this banquet. He was waiting. If Gu Beiyue objected to the Empress's actions, he would immediately stand up and agree. Bailey Lixiang was puzzled. She thought the Emperor had listened to Han Yunchi's pillow talk and agreed to hold this banquet. Could it be that Gu Beiyue had been bewitched by Han Yunchi as well? With Gu Beiyue's personality and style, he should have stopped the Emperor and Empress long before the banquet began. Bailey Lixiang waited patiently, not forgetting to secretly tug on her father's robes to remind him to stay calm and observe the situation. There was still something fishy about this situation. She had to be on guard against Han Yunchi setting up a trap for them. After all, Han Yunchi had cheated quite a bit of grain for the people of the disaster areas during the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet. Everyone was waiting for Han Yunchi to ask Grand Tutor Gu, but Han Yunchi only stared at Gu Beiyue for a long while before turning to look down at the crowd below without saying a word. This time, everyone lowered their heads, not daring to meet her gaze. The people sitting in the first row to the left and right were ranked in descending order of status. The 4 Guogong dukes, 3 generals, and the ministers of the other 5 ministries besides the Ministry of War were all seated in the first row. Almost all of them had brought their wives with them, who sat with them on the side. Bailey Yuanlong was an exception. His first wife had long passed away. Sitting next to him was Bailey Qiyu, who had been conferred the title of general. Behind him sat his eldest daughter, Bailey Lixiang, while behind Bailey Qiyu sat his wife. Han Yunchi's attention fell on Bailey Yuanlong and his family. Of the 10 empty red envelopes she'd given out, 3 were for the Bailey clan. Although the Guogong Duchess of the Bailey clan had passed away, Han Yunchi still prepared red envelopes for them. She'd sincerely wanted to give them this red envelope. Rather than saying it was out of respect and remembrance for the Duchess, it was more of a show of respect for the Bailey clan. This was a special treatment. To put it bluntly, she was telling the other 3 Guogong duchesses that the Bailey clan was different from them. However, Bailey Yuanlong and Bailey Lixiang didn't understand Han Yunchi's meaning. Their resentment only grew when they realized that the red envelopes they'd received were empty. There were also 2 red envelopes. One was for the general's wife behind Bailey Qiyu, while the other was for Bailey Lixiang. Bailey Lixiang had performed meritorious service in Northern Li as a spy, so she'd been conferred the title of First Rank Madam. Bailey Lixiang's title of First Rank Madam was another special treatment the imperial family had bestowed upon the Bailey clan. A First Rank Madam was the highest rank among the titled madams, so they received the best treatment. Madams of the first rank were usually the mothers or wives of high-ranking officials. Bailey Lixiang was the noble consort of the Northern Dynasty's emperors, so she couldn't accept such a title at all. Long Fei Yi could make her a princess or give her a large reward, but Long Fei Yi had made an exception to show his special treatment of the Bailey clan. When the country was first founded, the south was strong while the north and west were filled with all sorts of unstable elements. Long Fei Yi could use his power, military might, and iron-blooded policies to suppress them. But Cloud Realm continent still needed at least 3 more years to settle down before they could start rebuilding. The commoners would need at least 5 or 6 years to live a peaceful life. It'd take at least 10 or 20 years for them to prosper and prosper. Long Fei didn't want to waste any more time. It wasn't just his time, but the people of Cloud Realm continent. He'd spent countless days deliberating before bestowing the titles of Duke and Prime Minister. More than that, he'd spent countless nights talking with Gu Beiyue and a few of his trusted aides. In the end, they decided to wrong the Bailey clan and choose 4 clan heads from the south, west, and north to share the title of Guogong with Bailey Yuanlong. This way, the Bailey clan wouldn't be given too high of a title or salary, but would be able to highlight the status of the other 3 clans. At the very least, the other 3 clans would accept it wholeheartedly. Long Fei didn't tell Bailey Yuanlong the reason, because he'd wronged the Bailey clan while giving the man a test. After all, the man had disappointed him before. The result was regrettable. Even now, Bailey Yuanlong still didn't understand the special treatment he and Han Yunxi were giving him. He even colluded with the southern generals. Han Yunxi recovered from her thoughts with a smile on her face. Her gaze rested on Bailey Lixiang. That's Lixiang, right? Bailey Lixiang quickly rose to her feet. This subject's daughter, Bailey Lixiang, greets esteemed empress. Han Yunxi sized her up. She'd never seen Bailey Lixiang before, so today was the first time. It had to be said that Bailey Lixiang was much more beautiful than Bailey Mingxiang. Even at her age, she was still beautiful. But Han Yunxi could tell at a glance the difference between her and Bailey Mingxiang. Bailey Lixiang didn't have the kindness of Bailey Mingxiang, but lacked the ruthlessness of Bailey Mingxiang. Han Yunxi had seen Bailey Yuanlong's temper and brain many times. She'd always discussed with Long Fei Yi how he'd become a completely different person in the past year. Why was he so much calmer and shrewder than before? Moreover, his collusion with the Southern Army was done in a rather secretive manner. They still couldn't find anything to use against him. All of this had happened after Bailey Lixiang's return. How could Han Yunxi not suspect her? Lixiang, you're very knowledgeable. You should have seen banquets even bigger than this one. Tell me, this banquet held for the Crown Prince's first birthday isn't a disgrace to him, is it? Han Yunxi said with a smile. Bailey Lixiang was indeed very knowledgeable. She wanted to wait a bit, but since Han Yunxi had given her the chance, she didn't mind explaining to everyone how much Han Yunxi had spent on today's banquet. So far, Han Yunxi's biggest expenditure had been on the tableware in front of everyone. Yes, this subject obeys. Bailey Mingxiang nodded and said seriously, the banquet today looked simple, but there was a lot of thought put into it. It's clear to see esteemed Empress's intentions. This subject will talk about the tableware. Han Yunxi smiled and indicated for Bailey Lixiang to continue. The tableware used by His Majesty and esteemed Empress is the rarely seen glittering jewel rainbow dragon and phoenix porcelain. The entire set is divided into dragon and phoenix porcelain, with 69 pieces each, Bailey Lixiang said loudly. As soon as these words were spoken, many people present revealed looks of shock. Glittering jewel rainbow dragon and phoenix porcelain. They'd all heard of the name before, but almost no one had seen the real thing. So these 2 treasures were in the imperial family. Guogong Shaoan gave Bailey Lixiang a look of admiration. He'd had his suspicions when he saw the Emperor and Empress's tableware, but the tableware hadn't been fully arranged yet. There were only about 10 pieces, so he couldn't be sure. As expected, Bailey Lixiang's knowledge and eyesight were excellent. Han Yunxi clapped her hands happily. It's rare to see someone who can tell, hee hee. Although everyone was shocked, it was only shock. After all, The emperor and empress had the right to enjoy tableware of this standard. But Han Yunxi's next words immediately displeased everyone. Han Yunxi said, "Today we'll let everyone bask in the crown prince's glory and broaden their horizons. Later, the entire set of glittering jewel rainbow porcelain will be displayed. The entire set of glittering jewel rainbow dragon and phoenix porcelain would be displayed." That meant 69 tableware of all sizes, bowls, plates, pots, spoons, chopsticks, plates, spoons, and so on. Everything would be used. Looking at it this way, how many types of delicacies would there be tonight? In Northernly, the soldiers were starving as they sent disaster relief. The herdsmen were starving as they sought refuge from the cold. Han Yunxi, as the empress, actually spent so much money on a single meal. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Some of the more upright people had already started discussing. A trace of craftiness flitted past Bailey Lixiang's eyes as she said, "The tableware used by Prince Yu and the rest is also not ordinary. Esteemed Empress is generous and bestowed everyone with tableware of great origin." Chapter 1243. Even without Bailey Lixiang's introduction, everyone could tell that the tableware in front of them was no small matter. But Bailey Lixiang's introduction still surprised everyone. For example, Bailey Mingxiang said that the second seat's tableware wasn't expensive at all. It was made of black porcelain that was hard to find even with 1,000 gold taels. There were 59 pieces in each set, and only 10 pieces of the glittering rainbow dragon and phoenix porcelain had been bestowed. Another example, Bailey Lixiang said that the tableware in the 100 or so seats below the secondary seat was made of a rare white jade porcelain. It was both jade and porcelain, and each set had a total of 55 pieces, second only to the 4 black porcelain tableware in the secondary seat. Leaving aside the value of the porcelain, there were at least tens of thousands of pieces of tableware in the hall. How much food would it take to use all these tableware? How could a single person finish dozens of servings of food? Even if Northernly hadn't suffered a disaster, even if Great Qin didn't lack food, even if Great Qin was already a prosperous nation, there was no need to be so wasteful. Everyone's table was set with a round plate, a pair of chopsticks, and a wine cup. Aside from these three, the rest of the tableware was used to hold the food. The palace maids brought them up one after another and placed them in front of everyone. By the time Bailey Lixiang finished speaking, the palace maids had already brought out 3 individual pots of various sizes. Each pot was covered with a lid, making it impossible to see what was inside. But they could see the steam rising from the edges of the lids and smell the fragrance. Just by smelling the aroma, everyone could basically tell that these 3 pots were filled with meat. Although Long Fei Yi had announced the start of the banquet, he hadn't touched his chopsticks yet. No one else was allowed to touch them, so they could only smell the hot, fragrant food. Bailey Yuanlong and Xiao and looked stern, but their hearts were filled with excitement. Even the impatient Bailey Yuanlong was completely patient. He waited for all the dishes to be served, and for the loyal court officials to be thoroughly disappointed in Han Yunxi. He knew that the emperor was already on guard against him, so he might not be able to persuade the emperor. However, if those loyal officials also joined in, it would at least make the emperor re-evaluate the woman beside him. He had long heard that the emperor had told several civil officials in the imperial study that he had changed, and that the Bailey clan was no longer the Bailey clan of the past. In that case, he would let the emperor have a look. People changed, just like Han Yunxi, who had risked her life for the sake of disaster relief. She'd changed as well. In fact, the emperor himself had also changed, hadn't he? Perhaps he was the first to change. Ever since he met Han Yunxi, he was no longer the previous master of the Bailey clan, right? Apart from Bailey Yuanlong's group, some of the ministers in the back looked at each other worriedly. They respected the empress very much and were full of expectations. However, today's banquet had greatly disappointed them. The Crown Prince's first birthday banquet was indeed a major event and couldn't be shameful. But these were special times, so the empress had to restrain herself a little. Of course, everyone kept their worries to themselves. No one dared to speak up. After all, The emperor had only said one sentence so far. No one could tell what he thought of the empress's actions. Moreover, the banquet had only just begun. The dishes hadn't even been served yet. Even if they wanted to persuade the empress, they had to have sufficient reasons to convince the emperor. Apart from Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi's confidants, the hundreds of people in the large hall were growing more and more dissatisfied with Han Yunqi. Han Yunqi ignored everyone else, her attention on Bailey Li Xiang. She was growing more and more satisfied with her. She chuckled. It's rare to meet someone who knows what's good for them. Madame Li Xiang, take this set meal as a reward from the crown prince. Bailey Li Xiang hastily walked out of her seat and bowed in thanks. After Bailey Li Xiang returned to her seat, the hall fell silent again. Only the palace maids continued to dance gracefully as they served the dishes. Every dish was covered in steaming hot. The aroma was enough to make anyone drool. The weather was cold, and according to the rules of the banquet, every dish had to be covered. Thus, no one suspected anything. It was already mealtime. So many people were hungry. Unfortunately, Long Fei Yi still hadn't touched his chopsticks, so everyone could only keep him company on an empty stomach. Long Fei Yi sat high up in his seat. He was less dignified than he usually was in court, but the domineering air between his brows and the noble air of a king didn't diminish in the slightest. He didn't pay much attention to the people below. Even when Bailey Li Xiang explained the origin of the tableware, his doting gaze was focused on Han Yunqi. It was as if he knew Han Yunqi was fooling around, and that everyone was dissatisfied with the empress. But he was happy to let her do as she pleased. After Bailey Li Xiang sat down, she couldn't help but look at Long Fei Yi again. She'd heard all sorts of things about this master since childhood, but now she finally got the chance to meet him. He was handsome, domineering, noble, and aloof. Just like any other woman who'd seen him, she'd be instantly moved. But she knew very well that she'd missed her chance more than 20 years ago. She could only blame her younger sister, Bailey Mingxiang, in her heart. After Bailey Mingxiang entered the Duke of Qin's estate as a servant, she'd had so many chances. Why didn't she seize them? Otherwise, there would have been an imperial noble concubine by this man's side today. Her Bailey clan would have gained another bargaining chip. After a long silence, everyone began to count the dishes in front of them. There were still so many dishes left to be served. His Majesty wouldn't wait until all the dishes were served before starting the banquet, would he? Gu and Gu Beiwei had rushed over today, so they had no idea what Han Yunqi and Long Fei Yi were planning. Although Gu often ruined Long Fei Yi's plans, this banquet was Rui-er's, so he naturally kept his mouth shut. He sat with his arms crossed, carefully sniffing the table full of fragrances, as if he'd discovered something. But Gu Beiwei didn't seem interested in the food on the table. He stood up and broke the silence. This official has prepared a meager gift for His Highness the Crown Prince. I hope His Highness will kindly accept it. There were two ways to give gifts at birthday banquets. One was to give them before they entered the banquet, while the other was to present them. Giving gifts was the rule of ordinary households. Present gifts was the etiquette of the imperial family. Of the nearly 100 people present, those of low status had already handed over their birthday gifts to the eunuchs as soon as they'd enter the palace. As for those with high statuses, they would present gifts in front of everyone at the banquet. Generally speaking, the gifts would begin after the banquet had begun and after 3 rounds of wine. Since Gu Beiwei had started it and everyone was hungry, no one fussed over etiquette with Gu Beiwei. After all, there weren't many people who needed to present gifts in court. Perhaps His Majesty would start eating after the gifts were presented. Everyone was looking forward to seeing what Gu Beiwei's grand tutor would give His Highness the Crown Prince for his birthday. Gu Beiwei had someone deliver the gift, but it was none other than a giant map. He and his servants unfurled it and showed it to the Emperor, Empress, and Crown Prince, as well as the various officials. The map was even taller than him and 2 meters wide. It was a map of Cloud Realm Continent. Your Highness Crown Prince, this official spent 3 months drawing this map with my own hands. It includes every county and town in Cloud Realm Continent. Places prone to floods, droughts, fires, snowstorms, and other rare disasters have all been marked out. Gubeiwa paused before sighing. This year, the Great Qin's north has been plagued by disasters. Famine, plague, and snowstorms have alternated, leaving the people in dire straits. Your Highness is 1 year old today, so this official presents this gift to the victims of the north and the people of Great Qin. May the imperial family take pity on our Great Qin and wish for no more disasters. Rua didn't understand, but he'd long been captivated by the map. He glanced at his imperial father, who nodded, and jumped off his seat to walk in front of the unfurled map. He was only 1 year old and small to begin with. Standing before the map made him seem even more minuscule, but he wasn't intimidated by its size. Instead, he put his hands behind his back and raised his head to look at every spot on the map. Everyone fell silent, including Long, Fei Yi, and Han Yunqi. They watched Ray Er's back as he stared at the map of Great Qin with the same thought in their hearts. Time flew by in the blink of an eye. Rue would grow up one day and no longer look at this map. He'd stand at the peak of Great Qin and look down on the world beneath his feet. At that time, Great Qin would be a prosperous and powerful country, and there would be no more wars or disasters. In Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi's eyes, Gu Beiyue was pinning such hopes on Rue. Unfortunately, many of the people present had a different understanding. In their eyes, Gu Beiyue's mention of the disaster victims at such a grand and extravagant banquet must be a way to remind the emperor and express his dissatisfaction with the empress. Bailey Yuanlong stroked his beard, thinking that he'd respected the right person after all. Of all the people in Western Qin's camp, Gu Beiyue was the only one he admired. Bailey Lixiang smiled faintly as she secretly sized up Gu Beiyue. She couldn't believe it when she heard that the medical academy's head had married a woman whose legs were crippled. Xiao Dong kept shooting looks at Xiaoan. In his eyes, since Gu Beiyue had already expressed his stance, they naturally had to strike while the iron was hot and use this chance to speak up. But Xiaoan only glared at Xiao Dong's impulsiveness with a displeased look. It was really hard to say who would be the one to take the lead and who would be the first to stir up trouble in the coming days. Gu Beiyue had just returned to his seat when Gu presented him with the title deed to number 7 tea house, while Tang Li and Ning Jing presented him with a special concealed weapon toy. After the imperial family, it was time for the four Guogong to present their gifts. Bailey Yuanlong often considered himself the head of the four Guogong dukes. This time, he was the first to stand up. Under everyone's expectant gazes, Bailey Yuanlong presented a pearl with both hands. Your Highness Crown Prince, this is this year's new white pearl from the EC. It's a small wish. I hope you'll kindly accept it. At this moment, everyone looked at each other in dismay, and they began to panic. Official Bailey was giving a pearl as a Guogong, and a very, very ordinary one at that. What do you mean by this? He was clearly provoking the Crown Prince and Empress. Rue didn't understand, but he could sense that official Bailey's attitude wasn't good, so he didn't move. Bailey Yuanlong maintained his posture, but Han Yunqi's tone soon turned cold. Official Bailey, tell us, what's so special about this white pearl? Is it worth His Highness Crown Prince's goodwill? Chapter 1244. In the face of Han Yunqi's cold interrogation, Bailey Yuanlong revealed an innocent expression. It had to be said that if it weren't for his eldest daughter's repeated instructions, he wouldn't be enduring at this time, much less putting on such a pitiful appearance. He sighed helplessly. Your Majesty, there's nothing special about this pearl. The avalanche in Northernly has caused countless casualties, and the people of the Great Qin are suffering from hunger and cold. These days, the old man hasn't been able to sleep or eat. He's been constantly worried about the disaster in the north and the soldiers who came to help. I really don't have the time to prepare an elaborate gift for the Crown Prince. Although the gift is small, this old subject's heart is sincere. This old subject and Grand Tutor Gu are of one heart. We are both victims of the disaster in the north and pray for the Great Qin's people that the imperial family will pity us and wish for the Great Qin to be free of calamities. not to mention Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi. Even those who weren't familiar with Bailey Yuanlong were surprised by his words. Bailey Yuanlong's words were full of mockery. First, he was mocking the Empress for putting so much thought into preparing the Crown Prince's birthday celebration before the natural disaster. The Empress clearly didn't care about the disaster in the north. Second, he pulled Gu Beiwei to his side and forcefully misinterpreted Gu Beiwei's true intentions in giving the map. Pulling Gu Beiwei to his side was also a mockery of Han Yunxi. No matter what, Gu Beiwei was Han Yunxi's most trusted subordinate. Third, he was forcing the Crown Prince to accept this small gift. If His Highness didn't accept it, that would be superficial. He only valued the gift's value and didn't understand its significance. Of course, the Crown Prince was still young and didn't understand anything. Bailey Yuanlong's mockery of the Crown Prince was also a mockery of Han Yunxi, his mother. In short, Bailey Yuanlong's words were full of mockery and refined criticism of Han Yunxi. At this moment, everyone was looking at Han Yunxi. They couldn't guess how the Empress would react. Her response to Bailey Yuanlong's provocation would directly determine the attitudes of the other ministers. Han Yunxi was silent for a long time. Her face gradually became gloomy. The entire place was silent. No one made a sound. At this moment, Long Fei Yi opened his mouth and said, "A great gift is a great gift. Crown Prince, aren't you going to accept Dukshin's gift?" "Yes." Rui Er's voice was childish, but his eyes were serious. He personally walked down to stand in front of Bailey Yuanlong. Bailey Yuanlong was both surprised and delighted. He quickly knelt down and presented the gift with both hands. At this time, all the ministers were beaming with joy. The emperor was indeed wise. Since the emperor had already spoken, what were they afraid of? Of course, he had to be straightforward. As a result, Duke Qingshaoan also stood up and presented a small gift. He spoke of the country's righteousness and concern for its people, similar to Bailey Yuanlong's. While expressing her worries, she also mocked Han Yunxi. The other two dukes also presented their gifts, but they weren't small or large. They didn't mock the Empress, nor did they have any hidden meanings in their words. Instead, they congratulated her according to the rules. After the four dukes, it was time for the first-rank officials. Only two of these first-rank officials presented their gifts according to the rules. The rest followed Bailey Yuanlong's example and denounced the Empress with sarcasm. Han Yunxi sat motionless with an expressionless face. Seeing her sullen appearance, Bailey Yuanlong finally felt the pent-up frustration in his heart dissipate. Shaoan's lips curled into a cold smile. He never cared whether Long Fei Yi was forced to slap the Empress's face for the sake of the big picture, or whether he really couldn't stand the Empress's first birthday banquet. He only knew that once there was an opening, it wouldn't be difficult to follow. If there was a first time, there would definitely be a second and third time. After the gifts were presented, Han Yunxi's face was still sullen. She swept a glance at the table and reminded him unhappily, "Your Majesty, the dishes have all been served. Please eat." The dishes today were all personally prepared by Qinxia. Bailey Yuanlong was about to stand up when Bailey Lixiang pulled him back. Bailey Lixiang was still very cautious. Long Fei Yi nodded, and Han Yunxi ordered the court ladies on the side to serve them. Under everyone's gaze, the court ladies respectfully opened the largest porcelain pot on Long Fei Yi's table. As soon as the lid was lifted, steam wafted out, accompanied by a sweet fragrance. This was a smell Long Fei Yi was very familiar with, the smell of old hen soup. The court ladies carefully filled a bowl and placed it in front of Long Fei Yi before withdrawing. "Your Majesty, this is a whole chicken soup made from 3-year-old hens, mixed with 100-year-old snow ginseng and many other precious herbs. It's been simmering since this morning. This soup contains the essence of both chicken and herbs. For this dish, you only drink the soup and don't eat the meat." Han Yunxi introduced seriously, her mood much better. Long Fei Yi looked down at the chicken soup in front of him with furrowed brows. He didn't move for a long time, as if thinking about something. Everyone sighed in their hearts. A small pot of soup used a chicken and a lot of expensive herbs. Just this dish alone used more than 100 old hens. How much food would they consume if they were to finish the entire meal today? How much silver? Everyone couldn't help but look at the steaming pot of soup in front of their tables. They really wanted to take a look. But His Highness hadn't moved yet, so they couldn't move. At this moment, Bailey Lixiang gave the latter's servant a look, then gave her father a light kick. It was finally time to make a move. It wasn't a big deal to dislike the gifts for being too small. However, such extravagance and waste was solid evidence that everyone could see for themselves. Han Yunshi, even if His Majesty wants to protect you this time, he might not be able to. Bailey Yuanlong immediately stood up, walked out of his seat, and knelt down on both knees. In an instant, the entire hall fell into a deathly silence. Bailey Yuanlong, what are you doing? Long Fei spoke up. This old subject asks Your Majesty, Empress, and His Highness the Crown Prince to forgive this old subject. Bailey Yuanlong said loudly. What crime have you committed? Long Fei asked again. Today is the Crown Prince's first birthday, so it should be lively and festive. Esteemed Empress is holding a birthday banquet for the Crown Prince and inviting important officials for a joyous occasion. However, the commoners in the north haven't been able to eat their fill, and the soldiers who came to relieve the disaster are also starving. This old subject's heart is bitter, unable to enjoy such a feast. This old subject earnestly asks Your Majesty to allow this old subject to withdraw. Leave? Everyone knew that official Bailey was going to denounce the Empress, but they didn't expect that he wouldn't be as fierce and direct as before. Instead, he was begging the Emperor to allow him to leave to express his anger. This wasn't just expressing his anger, but also throwing the difficult problem to the Emperor. To put it more bluntly, he was threatening the Emperor. He was threatening the Emperor to make a choice on the spot. Accept the Empress' extravagance and waste and ignore the disaster victims, or accept his advice. If the Emperor allowed him to withdraw, then he would be condoning the Empress's absurd actions in front of everyone. The Emperor would definitely be implicated and lose the hearts of his subjects. If the Emperor didn't allow him to withdraw, then he would definitely argue with reason and force the Emperor to punish the Empress in order to appease the hearts of his subjects. Han Yunshi sat quietly in the silence. Long Fei was also very quiet as he looked at Bailey Yuanlong. Your Majesty, please allow this old subject to withdraw. Bailey Yuanlong said again. This time, several officials from the Bailey camp all stood up and knelt with Bailey Yuanlong, saying in unison, Your Majesty, this subject is worried about the disaster victims in the north and has no heart to enjoy today's feast. We earnestly ask Your Majesty to allow this subject to withdraw. Long Fei's brows furrowed at this. To the side, Gu narrowed his eyes. He hadn't taken the Bailey clan seriously before, but today was the first time he had seriously slapped Bailey Yuanlong's face. Gu Beiwell lowered his head and didn't say anything. At this time, many people were staring at him, waiting to see where he stood. Bailey Mingxiang, who was kneeling behind Bailey Yuanlong, stole a glance at Xiao Dong. He was a bit anxious. They'd agreed to move together, but the Xiao family hadn't moved. What was the meaning of this? Seeing that the Emperor hadn't said anything, Bailey Yuanlong knelt for the third time and begged, Please allow this, Your Majesty. At this time, many of the upright and loyal officials also stood up and knelt behind Bailey Yuanlong. They hadn't been involved in the struggle between factions and had always supported the Empress and Crown Prince. However, they were disappointed this time. Their actions weren't in line with Bailey Yuanlong, but to make their stance clear, the only reason they hadn't stood up immediately was because their ranks were lower and they didn't have much influence. Now that so many high-ranking officials had stood up, they naturally had to join in. They didn't say much and kowtowed one after another. Your Majesty, please allow this subject to withdraw. At this time, Long Fei looked at the motionless Xiao and Duke Ding. Do you want to stay? Xiaoan felt that this matter wasn't simple, but he couldn't find anything wrong. No matter how powerful Han Yunshi was, there were still times when she was muddle-headed and arrogant. Xiaoan hurriedly got up and walked to the center of the hall, kneeling next to Bailey Yuanlong. Your Majesty, Please allow this old subject to withdraw. Seeing this, Xiao Dong and some of the Xiao family's henchmen also knelt. In a short while, 2/3 of the several hundred people in the hall had knelt. Long Fei still didn't express his stance. He looked pensively at those who hadn't knelt. Time slowly passed. Everyone waited for Long Fei's decision. At this time, a eunuch hurriedly walked over and whispered in Long Fei's ear, "Your Majesty, many commoners have gathered at the north and south gates. The leaders are all scholars, and they're denouncing Her Majesty the Empress." Long Fei suddenly glared at him. "What did they say?" The eunuch jumped in fright. His legs turned to jelly, and he felt his knees with a plop. "Speak," Long Fei said sternly. They said that Her Majesty the Empress held a banquet for the Crown Prince's first birthday and was extravagant and wasteful, ignoring the disaster victims. No. The eunuch was so scared that his tongue was tied. "She's not fit to be the Empress. No, she's not fit to be the mother of the heir apparent. Extravagant and wasteful?" Long Fei sneered. "Is there such a thing, Her Majesty?" Wasn't this the truth in front of their eyes? Was there need to ask? Everyone in the hall was alarmed and disappointed. The commoners were already making a fuss. Was the emperor still insisting on indulging the empress? Han Yunshi exhaled and left the banquet. She pulled Rui to kneel in front of Long Fei. "Your Majesty, there's no such thing. Qinxia has been wrongly accused." Chapter 1245. As soon as Han Yunshi cried out, Rui, who didn't understand, immediately followed suit. "Imperial father, Imperial mother, is innocent." Han Yunshi almost laughed out loud. This son really was her biological son. "How are you innocent?" Long Fei asked. "Your Majesty, this concubine doesn't know if this concubine is fit to be empress or the crown prince's mother. However, this concubine is organizing the crown prince's birthday banquet without any extravagance or wastage or neglect the disaster victims." Before Han Yunshi could finish, Bailey Yuanlong angrily interrupted. "Your Majesty, everyone will have a table full of delicacies for today's banquet. One person's meal can fill 10 people's stomachs. If this isn't extravagance and wastage, then what is? There are commoners and soldiers in the north who can't return to their homes. It's not easy for them to even have a full meal. Your entire pot of chicken soup only consumes a few mouthfuls of soup. Haha, this really isn't wastage? This is a reckless waste of natural resources." Han Yunshi looked at Bailey Yuanlong and asked coldly, "Is there anything else?" Bailey Yuanlong sneered. "Your Majesty, today's banquet is extraordinary. Could it be that Your Majesty doesn't think it's a waste?" Just as everyone was surprised that Han Yunshi would argue, Han Yunshi actually admitted it loudly. "Official Bailey is extremely right. There's a natural disaster in the north. This concubine's grand banquet is a grave mistake, a grave mistake." For a moment, everyone was stunned, thinking that they had misheard. Under the silent gazes of the crowd, Han Yunshi stood up with Rui and walked to Long Fei. Zhao Mama and Mu Ling who had been hiding at the side, finally showed themselves. They walked out from the left and right and stood on either side of Han Yunshi and Mu Ling personally opened the lids of all the cutlery on Long Fei's table. The kneeling people couldn't see the contents of the pots and bowls, so they didn't know what was going on. With a smile on her face, Mu Linger and Granny Zhao brought the pots and bowls down one by one for the officials to see. She saw that the pots and bowls were all filled with clear soup with spices. Not to mention fish, she couldn't even find a single tea leaf. For a moment, everyone, whether they were kneeling or sitting, was stupefied. Bailey Yuanlong and Bailey Li Xiang were dumbstruck, as if someone had sealed their acupoints. They couldn't even move their eyes. As for the members of the Xiao clan, their expressions were extremely ugly. Who would have thought that a table full of hot and fragrant food would turn out to be like this? Han Yunshi was clearly toying with them on purpose. Was Han Yunshi playing with them on purpose? It could only be said that these people were too full of themselves. Han Yunshi didn't have that much time on her hands. She was just using this opportunity to give some people a final warning. Granny Zhao personally brought over the pot of fragrant chicken soup. Han Yunqi said, "Crown Prince, help your imperial father scoop the soup." Rui, who was very obedient and brought over the empty bowl with both hands. Han Yunqi personally scooped up a spoonful of chicken soup and placed it in the bowl. Rui carefully placed the chicken soup on the table. He didn't say a word as he followed his imperial mother to Bailey Yuanlong's seat. Granny Zhao immediately followed with the chicken soup, while Mu Linger followed closely behind. In front of everyone, she opened all the cutlery on Bailey Yuanlong's table. The table was filled with delicacies, but there was no fish, fruits, or vegetables. There was only clear soup with added spices. Bailey Yuanlong couldn't believe or accept this reality. He stuck his head out to look, but the truth was right in front of him. Rui personally brought over an empty bowl, while Han Yunqi personally scooped up a spoonful of chicken soup. This scene puzzled the shocked crowd. They couldn't figure out Han Yunqi's intentions and didn't dare to speculate. Starting from Bailey Yuanlong, Han Yunqi opened all the cutlery on the kneeling officials with the help of Granny Zhao and Mu Linger and left a spoonful of chicken soup for them. After walking around in a circle, they finally returned to Long Fei's side. By now, the bowl of chicken soup was almost empty. Granny Zhao respectfully placed the pot of stewed chicken and medicinal ingredients on Long Fei's table. Granny Zhao and Mu Linger withdrew, while Han Yunqi held Rui's hand and returned to kneeling. Everyone quietly watched the mother and son's every move. Without a doubt, even a small movement from them was enough to set off perilous waves in the crowd's hearts. Han Yunqi said seriously, "Your Majesty, the Crown Prince's first birthday celebration is a great ceremony and cannot be abolished." What is a ceremony? This concubine believes that it is a ceremony to share joy and suffering with the people. Today, there is a natural disaster in the north, and the people are suffering. The Crown Prince's first birthday celebration is a ceremony to share the suffering of the people. For today's banquet, this concubine only ordered the kitchens to prepare a pot of chicken soup for Your Majesty and the ministers. This is to tell the world that our imperial family and court are concerned about the suffering of the people and are always thinking about the disaster victims in the north. Long Fei nodded seriously. Han Yunqi, Bailey Yuanlong's faction, and the Shao clan's faction were all sweating profusely. Their limbs were weak, and their hearts were even weaker. Bailey Yuanlong's face was indescribably pale, and Bailey Lixiang's stunned expression was still frozen on her face. It took her a long time to recover. However, there were also many officials who were kneeling on the ground who looked happy and respected the Empress again. Han Yunqi's next words were once again unexpected, catching Bailey Yuanlong and the Shao clan's faction unprepared. Han Yunqi said, "Your Majesty, this concubine recently obtained food and spices from Mu Ling. Thus, she used the spices to make soup and used the Crown Prince's first birthday celebration as an opportunity to test all the officials. This concubine believes that anyone who dares to leave the banquet and speak out to remonstrate today is a loyal official who cares about the people." This is Han Yunqi rewarding them? Isn't she going to pursue the crime of slandering the Empress? Bailey Yuanlong looked at Shao, who looked back at him. The two of them were even more afraid now. If Han Yunqi held them responsible for slandering the Empress, they could still defend themselves by saying that those who didn't know the truth weren't guilty, and that they'd rather die than speak out to show their integrity. But Han Yunqi actually played such a trick and rewarded them? This is too unsettling. What kind of game is Han Yunqi playing? Forget Bailey Yuanlong. Even the experienced and astute Shao had to admit that he couldn't see through the Empress's tricks. If you don't know the enemy, how can you fight? How could they win? At this moment, Bailey Yuanlong and Shao were truly afraid. They feared Han Yunqi from the bottom of their hearts. Bailey Lixiang finally recovered her wits, her mind still a little muddled. This woman who didn't play by the rules had already messed up all her plans and arrangements. Besides kneeling, she didn't know what to do or what to do next. Of those kneeling, some were terrified, while others rejoiced. Those sitting in their original seats weren't in a good mood either. Those who knew the truth naturally weren't afraid, but those who didn't know were no less terrified than Bailey Yuanlong, and Xiao, an esteemed empress, had only said that the kneeling officials were upright officials, but hadn't said anything about the sitting ones. But in comparison, they'd become the ones who'd put their own safety first, and even helped the tyrant. A single birthday banquet and an empty banquet table. She'd practically figured out all the officials' positions and styles. "Rise and return to your seats," Long Fei said. After the empress and crown prince took their seats, all the officials thanked the emperor and empress before returning to their seats. Long Fei picked up a bowl of chicken soup and smiled. "This is the best soup we've had since ascending the throne." He drank it all in one gulp. "My beloved subjects, have a taste." Those who'd received chicken soup all stood up to drink from their bowls, while those who hadn't also stood up with awkward looks on their faces. After drinking the soup, everyone thought that Long Fei would make things difficult for those who'd put their own safety first. But Long Fei didn't. The matter seemed to have passed just like that, leaving everyone in disbelief. Bailey Yuanlong and Xiaoan couldn't believe that the emperor and empress would let it go so easily. Bailey Lixiang suddenly remembered something and quickly shot a glance at a young eunuch on the side. The eunuch nodded and hurriedly retreated. However, as soon as he reached the door, he was stopped by Su Donglin. "Where are you in such a hurry to go?" Su Donglin asked. This servant is going to relieve myself." The eunuch's teeth were trembling. "This young master just happens to be going as well." "Let's go together," Su Donglin said. The eunuch's panic was written all over his face. He timidly followed Su Donglin to the outhouse before returning. "Is there anything else?" Su Donglin asked. "And in nothing else." The eunuch shook his head. "Then go back and wait on her. Esteemed Empress has already given the order. Anyone who dares to run away in the middle of the banquet will be guilty of a great crime." Su Donglin warned coldly. The eunuch scrambled back to his seat. It took time for news of the imperial palace to spread to the outside world, and it required many people to spread it by word of mouth. The extravagance and waste of this birthday banquet had already been revealed, but the troublemakers outside the palace had no idea. The eunuch had just helped Bailey Lixiang spread the news, which had already reached the scholars who were causing trouble. Heaven knows what kind of mess they'd make. The eunuch wanted to give Bailey Lixiang a look when he entered the hall, but she didn't look back. Meanwhile, the banquet hall was silent. The crown prince was about to begin his task. The wide table was filled with all sorts of things, 66 in total. There were seals, books, brushes, ink, paper, inkstone, abacus, coins, account books, food, toys, and so on. Rui was standing in front of the table, looking at the items. Everyone knew that the crown prince was precocious. Even if he wasn't, the empress would have trained him to only grab the seals. Thus, no one cared about what the crown prince would grab. Everyone was still thinking about what had happened just now. Those who wanted to protect themselves were all speculating on how the emperor would deal with them. Meanwhile, Bailey Yuanlong's and Xiaoan's factions were still panicking, trying to guess what Han Yunxi was planning. It was just a banquet to begin with, but everyone had been tormented until they were hungry and terrified. They were both physically and mentally exhausted. However, Han Yunxi, Long Fei, and Gu were all looking at Rui expectantly. Han Yunxi hadn't told Rui what to grab, but Long Fei had told to grab whatever he liked. If Rui didn't like the seals and didn't want to inherit the throne in the future, he'd let Rui do as he pleased. In any case, Han Yunxi was still young. She could always give Rui more brothers. Everyone was looking forward to it because they didn't know what Rui would grab. And secondly, Han Yunxi and Long Fei had made a bet, Gu and Gu Beiwe had made a bet, and Tang Li and Ning Jing had made a bet as well. If all the civil and military officials in the hall were to know that their masters were actually in the mood to make a bet, how would they feel? What would Rui grab? Chapter 1246. What would Rui grab? Han Yunxi bet that Rui would grab the antidote needle, while Long Fei bet that Rui would grab the sword. The loser would have to eat the noodles cooked by the winner. Gu bet that Rue would grab the seal, while Gu bet that Rue would grab the abacus. The loser would have to be the winner's servant for a day. Tang Li bet that Rue would grab the scriptures, while Ning Jing bet that Rue would grab the coins. The winner would be in charge of the finances. How would Rue know that he was shouldering 3 wins and losses? He stood there for a long time, pondering seriously. It was really difficult to face so many choices. In fact, there were many things he wanted, but he could only have one. He grabbed his fingers, feeling more and more conflicted. The longer Rue hesitated, the longer the ministers panicked. The gifts had been presented, and the banquet was over. The banquet should be over after the drawing of lots, right? Almost 80% of the people in the hall were hoping for the banquet to end quickly, because as long as it ended, they could no longer believe that the Empress was kind enough to not pursue their responsibility for slander. They could no longer believe that the Emperor was in a good mood today and would not pursue their crime of protecting themselves. Finally, Veyer reached out his hand. This time, the anxious people finally breathed a sigh of relief, as if they could see the hope of the banquet ending. On the other hand, Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi were nervous. The outcome was about to be decided. The hall was silent as everyone's eyes were fixed on Rue. Rue's hand reached out for the seal and grabbed it. At this moment, Gu Beiwei showed an extremely gratified smile. Gu's mood fell to the bottom. Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi, Tang Li and Ning Jing were not willing to lose or win, as expected of the crown prince. Heaven's will cannot be disobeyed. Long Fei Yi said loudly, come here. Although Zhou Zhao had foreshadowed it, Long Fei Yi and the others did not believe it. If Rue grabbed the seal, would the officials believe that the crown prince would be the emperor in the future? Would they all submit? This was a naive thought. Long Fei Yi carried Rue up and let him sit beside him. This action of his was much more significant than grabbing the seal. He was telling everyone how much he expected of Rue and how much he doted on him. It was a taboo for the crown prince to take the initiative to sit on the main seat. However, Long Fei Yi, the emperor, personally carried the crown prince up. That was the highest level of favor. The officials were all shocked when they saw this. They also knew that the emperor was doing this for everyone to see. Now that the things used to catch Zhou were taken back, everyone's anxious heart finally calmed down a little. They were just waiting for the emperor to announce the end of the banquet. However, at this moment, a eunuch suddenly rushed in, looking very terrified. Your Majesty, something bad has happened. Not good. After the eunuch knelt, he shouted loudly. Speak clearly. Long Fei Yi glared at him. Han Yunxi was even angrier. How dare you speak carelessly at the crown prince's first birthday banquet? Unless it's something extremely important, I won't forgive you. Your Majesty, esteemed Empress, the 2 groups of troublemakers have beaten up the soldiers and are rushing to the palace gates to meditate. The eunuch hastily reported. Bailey Li Xiang was alarmed. Didn't she have someone spread the news? Why haven't they stopped yet? Bailey Yuanlong immediately turned to look at Bailey Li Xiang. Father and daughter looked at each other, speechless. Long Fei Yi's voice suddenly turned cold. Do they want to rebel? The banquet hasn't even ended yet. How would those troublemakers know that the Empress is being extravagant? The hall was silent. No one dared to answer. The Bailey clan and the Shao clan were well aware of the commoners causing trouble. As for the others, they were all part of the government and could more or less smell something fishy going on. Just like the emperor said, the banquet hadn't even ended yet. How would the commoners know what happened? Moreover, those troublemakers hadn't started making a fuss now, but when General Bailey had stepped forward to admonish the Empress, they'd already started. Was there really such a coincidence in the timing? Those with ulterior motives didn't dare make a sound, while those with no ulterior motives didn't dare speak up, afraid that they'd offend one of the Guadukes without knowing the truth. Bailey Yuanlong was sweating profusely. He finally understood. How could Han Yunxi let him off so easily? Han Yunxi was waiting for those troublemakers to make a big fuss. After all, if Han Yunxi accused him of slander, he could still defend himself. But if Han Yunshi made a fuss about helping the commoners and causing trouble, it'd be very, very serious if it was discovered that the Bailey clan had instigated the commoners. In the silence, Bailey Li Xiong unconsciously pressed a hand to her chest. Right now, her heart was pounding so fast that she found it hard to breathe. It felt like it could jump out of her chest at any moment. She never thought that things would develop to this point, nor did she think that the situation would be so serious. She thought that the commoners would put pressure on the emperor, who valued the people's will. But who knew that this would become a life-threatening trap for the Bailey clan? The emperor would definitely catch a few troublemakers and kill the chickens to warn the monkeys. Bailey Li Xiong could only hope that the leader she'd hired wouldn't betray her. In the silence, she finally couldn't help but speak up. "Your Majesty, esteemed Empress." Before this, there were rumors that esteemed Empress was going to hold a banquet for His Highness the Crown Prince, but the commoners must have misunderstood esteemed Empress. As the saying goes, the ignorant are not guilty. The commoners didn't do it on purpose, so please don't let this disturb His Majesty and esteemed Empress mood. Han Yunshi looked over, a cold smile flitting through her eyes. Bailey Li Xiong's mouth was even more lovable than Bailey Mingxiang's. Unfortunately, she didn't like it at all. With a look from her, the eunuch reported. "Reporting to Your Majesty, those unruly commoners heard from somewhere that Her Highness the Empress gave everyone a full set of tableware for the birthday banquet. They said that there were thousands of bowls on the table tonight." Before he could finish, Long Fei Yi slammed the table with a loud bang. In an instant, everyone quieted down. Not a single sound could be heard. But after a moment, the Shao clan head, Shaoan, was the first to stand up and kneel. "Your Majesty, please quell your anger." At this moment, all the ministers came to their senses and stood up in panic. They left their seats and knelt down. "Your Majesty, please quell your anger. Your Majesty, please quell your anger." How could they not be frightened? This was too big a deal. The banquet wasn't over yet, so no one had left. Even the servants hadn't left. The commoners all knew about the tableware. It was clear that someone had leaked the secret, that someone was stirring up trouble behind the scenes, and that someone was even in charge of the affair. Inciting the commoners to slander the Empress and smear the Crown Prince's first birthday banquet was a crime even more serious than rebellion. Slandering the Empress, which had been passed down through generations, paled in comparison to this crime. Bailey Li Xiong and Bailey Yuanlong were both stupefied. It wasn't until Bailey Qiyu reminded them that father and daughter hurriedly knelt. "Fa father," Bailey Li Xiong cried out, unable to finish her sentence. She'd been tricked. The Bailey clan had been tricked. Although she'd hired those commoners, she'd indeed leaked the news. But she wasn't stupid enough to reveal the tableware and the details of the banquet. Who had leaked the news of the tableware? Was it the Shao clan, or perhaps Han Yunchi herself? Bailey Li Xiong couldn't think straight anymore, while Bailey Yuanlong's mind was completely blank. They could only pray that the people they'd bribed wouldn't rat them out. "Please don't." But Long Fei Yi said coldly, "Someone come, immediately arrest those unruly commoners for Zhen. Don't let a single one escape. If we don't get an answer tonight, none of them will be allowed to take a single step out of the hall." Bailey Li Xiong's heart almost stopped at these words. Bailey Yuanlong's body was already swaying. He couldn't even kneel properly. "Bring them here for interrogation. I'd like to ask them why I'm not fit to be Empress." Han Yunchi said coldly. So many people had drunk her chicken soup, but how many of them would be enlightened? Why did she prepare chicken soup instead of duck soup or other kinds of soup? Did they really think that Zhao Mama had raised too many chickens and no one would eat them? Kill the chicken to warn the monkey. She was reminding everyone that she was going to kill the chicken to warn the monkey tonight. If she didn't catch someone and teach them a lesson today, would these people still think she was an empress to play with? Actually, she'd originally planned to use the banquet as an excuse to ask the rich ministers to donate to Northern Li and raise some money and supplies for the disaster areas. Then she'd send them to them in Rue Er's name. This could be considered a gift from her and Long Fei Yi to Rue. But the Bailey and Shao clans both objected as soon as she said she was going to hold a banquet. She might as well spread the word that she was going to hold a grand birthday banquet. If she didn't use this chance to teach the Bailey and Shao clans a lesson, the two most powerful factions in the Great Qin Empire would only get more and more overboard. Thus, she'd asked Muling to come up with the idea of the tableware. As for the rioting commoners outside, she could only guess that they'd been bribed by the Bailey and Shao clans. As for whether they'd been bribed by the Bailey or Shao clans, she couldn't be sure. Bailey Lixiang's behavior made her guess that the Bailey clan was the mastermind behind the scenes. As for the tableware, no one had leaked it. Even now, the commoners still didn't know about the tableware. The eunuch had only said that because she'd ordered Zhao Mama to tell him about it. Later, they'd bring the commoners into the palace and interrogate the consul's men in the Great Hall. Under her and Long Fei Ye's intimidation, would the consul scholars be able to explain themselves clearly? Wouldn't they be so frightened that they'd immediately confess who was behind the scenes? The huge venue was terrifyingly quiet. Everyone seemed to be able to hear their own heartbeats. If not for Bailey Lixiang supporting him, Bailey Yuanlong would have fainted long ago. Bailey Lixiang looked like she'd lost her mind. Her palms were covered in sweat, gradually soaking her father's sleeves. This kind of quiet waiting was simply torture. Finally, the sound of shuffling footsteps came from outside the hall. Bailey Lixiang couldn't help but turn back to see a crowd of commoners being pushed in by the guards. They were all kneeling outside the hall. They'd been making a ruckus earlier, but now that everyone was kowtowing, no one daring to raise their heads. "Bring in the consul's men," Long Fei Yi said coldly. Chapter 1247. The leaders of the riot were two scholars. Before the two of them were escorted to the main hall, they saw the emperor, the empress, and a group of ministers sitting in the main hall from afar. Their legs went soft. One fell to the ground while the other knelt, unable to get up. "Your Majesty, have mercy! Your Majesty, have mercy!" This commoner was ordered to do this. "Your Majesty, have mercy! I beg your Majesty to have mercy. This commoner doesn't know anything. Someone ordered us to do this." Everyone in the hall wore different expressions at these words. Han Yunxi sneered inwardly. She'd overestimated these two leaders. She'd thought she'd have to interrogate them after bringing them into the hall. But now, before they even came in, they had already confessed everything. "Who ordered you to do this?" Long Fei Yi asked again. Long Fei Yi didn't know what Han Yunxi had done, but he wasn't stupid enough to ask who leaked the secret. Long Fei Yi's angry voice scared one of them into fainting. Now the hall was completely silent. Bailey Yuanlong and Bailey Lixiang were both trembling. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that a great disaster was about to befall them. The scholar outside the hall was so scared he couldn't speak clearly, his tongue in a knot. Yes, it was a eunuch in the palace who ordered this commoner to do this. Bailey Yuanlong's heart stopped at these words, but Bailey Lixiang was still holding on. She hoped that the eunuch wouldn't betray her. Of course, she'd done this in secret. She hadn't directly negotiated with the two leaders, but through a palace eunuch. This eunuch was called Chun Zhaoda. He hadn't personally negotiated with the two scholars either, but through a middleman. As long as the middleman kept his mouth shut and Chun Zhaoda didn't leak the secret, they wouldn't be able to find out the truth in a short time. "Who is it?" Long Fei Yi asked again. Bailey Lixiang's heart was hanging in the air. She kept comforting herself that Chun Zhaoda wasn't that stupid. If he confessed, he'd lose his life too. The scholar didn't say anything for a long time. The little eunuch Chun Zhaoda stood to the side, his hands and feet trembling. He didn't dare to raise his head. In the silence, the atmosphere became more and more tense. Bailey Lixiang and Bailey Yuanlong were probably the most nervous people present. Life and death were at stake. "You're not going to say it, are you?" Long Fei Yi's cold voice made the people around him fearful. The scholar was scared out of his wits. "This commoner doesn't." Before he could finish speaking, Han Yunxi suddenly spoke. "Someone dragged Chun Zhaoda out for this consort. Tell him to endure this for a while." "Yes," Su Donglin replied loudly. Bailey Li Xiang and Bailey Yuanlong were both stunned. The scholar had no idea who Chun Zhaota was. He was wondering. Chun Zhaota immediately knelt down in the main hall. "Your Majesty, please spare my life. Your Majesty, please spare me." This servant was forced. This servant was... Before he could finish his sentence, Bailey Li Xiang threw herself at him like a mad woman. "Don't speak nonsense." As soon as these words were spoken, the originally quiet hall fell into an indescribable silence. Even the world outside was silent. Bailey Li Xiang fell at the eunuch's feet, dumbstruck. Only then did she realize what she'd said and done. Heavens, what's wrong with me? Even if Chun Dezhao sold me out, I could still deny it. Even if you beat me to death. She could even use her death to prove her resolve and protect the Bailey clan. But, however, what she did just now was undoubtedly a confession without being pressed. Everyone was looking at her. Some were shocked, some were sympathetic, and some were rejoicing in her misfortune. Of course, the Bailey clan was filled with despair. Chun Dezhao hadn't expected Bailey Li Xiang to throw herself at him. He met her eyes, too shocked to say anything. Han Yunxi watched all of this from her high vantage point, her face expressionless. Actually, she didn't know who the two troublemakers had contacted, nor did she know who Bailey Li Xiang had told to do it. Su Donglin had caught Chun Dezhao sneaking out of the palace, so she knew that Bailey Li Xiang and Chun Dezhao were in cahoots. So, she'd pushed Chun Dezhao out of the hall and let the scholar identify him as the culprit. It was purely a test. More accurately, it was a psychological warfare. The effect of this psychological warfare was really beyond her expectations. She'd only guessed that the mastermind behind Chun Dezhao was here, but never expected Bailey Li Xiang to admit herself. Now, she didn't need to waste her breath, nor did she need to waste her breath. It wasn't that she was cruel or that her methods were despicable. There was no such thing as fair competition in the palace or court, nor was there any such thing as open and above board. She was just giving Bailey Li Xiang a taste of her own medicine. She looked at Bailey Li Xiang from her lofty vantage point. 3 parts sympathy, 3 parts anger, and 6 parts regret. If Bailey Li Xiang was smart enough, she would have stayed in Northern Li as a first-rank madam and never come back. How could the Long Fei Yi hand over all of Northern Li to Jin Zi? That was a very risky move. Based on her understanding of Northern Li and her connections, as long as she had enough patience and time, she'd definitely be able to gain a certain amount of power. Moreover, if the Long Fei Yi needed to restrain Jin Zi in the future, he'd definitely use her. She'd left the Bailey clan for so long, so why did she come back and get involved in this mess? Did she think she had enough ability and intelligence to fight for more benefits for the Bailey clan? How foolish. She must have forgotten. She wasn't the only one who'd managed to climb all the way to the position of imperial noble concubine and become the most favored concubine of the Northern Dynasty's emperors. How much help had the Long Fei Ye's forces in Northern Li given her over the past decade? Just how much of Long Fei's advice had he given her on important decisions? Suddenly, Bailey Yuanlong groaned and spat out a mouthful of blood. "Father!" Bailey Qiyu cried out in alarm as he rushed over to support him. Bailey Li Xiang finally recovered her wits and anxiously crawled over. "Father! Father!" Bailey Yuanlong wanted to say something, but his mouth remained open as he stared at the Long Fei Yi. In the end, he couldn't speak, and his vision darkened as he fainted. "Your Majesty, it was all my idea. My father and my younger siblings didn't know. It was all my idea. Your Majesty, please save my father. Please save my father." The Long Fei Yi was as cold as an iceberg, expressionless and silent. If the Long Fei Yi didn't speak, no one would dare save Bailey Yuanlong, even if he was on the verge of death. After all, inciting the people to revolt was the most serious of crimes. In the worst case, it was punishable by 9 familial exterminations. "Your Majesty, have mercy. This sinner pleads guilty. This sinner pleads guilty. This sinner is at your Majesty's disposal. My father is innocent. Your Majesty, I beg you to have mercy. Your Majesty, please save my father on account of all his hard work over the years. Your Majesty, esteemed Empress, have mercy. Esteemed Empress. Bailey Lixiang was like a mad woman as she kowtowed incoherently. Bailey Qiyu and his wife also knelt and begged for mercy. Soon enough, the generals and their wives of the Bailey army all knelt as well, including the ministers. But the Long Fei Yi still didn't say a word, his gaze so cold that it was terrifying. The Guogong of Ding, Shaoan, had never expected things to turn out this way. Now, he felt both fear and relief. Back then, Xiao Dong had been so infatuated with Bailey Lixiang that he'd almost done the deed for her. Fortunately, he'd stopped him. Otherwise, he'd be the one vomiting blood and losing consciousness. Bailey Lixiang had colluded with Xiao Dong in an attempt to use the Southern Army's influence to put pressure on the Long Fei Yi. He'd also wanted to borrow the Bailey clan's power to put pressure on the Long Fei Yi. Both sides were aiming for the position of Empress and noble consort, so there was no problem in working together. Fortunately, he kept his cool and wasn't impatient. Otherwise, he'd have been implicated today. The Bailey clan's members were all kneeling on the ground, their pleas filling the hall. Long Fei Yi was like an emotionless god, looking down on them from high above. How many of them could see the anger and disappointment in his eyes? Han Yunxi didn't need to look to know Long Fei Yi was suffering. How could she not be suffering too? She wasn't the true princess of Western Qin, as she hadn't spent much time with the D clan. If the D clan had betrayed her and done something like this, she'd be angry and disappointed. Moreover, Long Fei Ye's relationship with the Bailey clan wasn't just a simple master-servant relationship. Bailey Yuanlong should have been the one who understood Long Fei Yi the most. Even if he was a crude man who wasn't meticulous enough and couldn't see through his master's thoughts after all these years, he should have been the most loyal person. But after the founding of the country, the Bailey clan had been the most outrageous and unbridled in the court's power struggles. Not to mention those who rejoiced in their misfortune, it was already good enough that they didn't kick them while they were down. Even those who'd benefited from Bailey Yuanlong and had been friends with him for many years didn't dare speak up in the face of the furious Long Fei Yi. The unconscious Bailey Yuanlong suddenly coughed up another mouthful of blood. Father! Father! Bailey Lixiang and Bailey Qiyu didn't know what to do. Everyone else was also trembling with fear. This old general who'd followed the emperor the longest, who'd watched him grow up, and who was the pillar of the Bailey clan. Was he really going to die in the main hall like this? Finally, someone stood up in the silence. It was none other than Grand Tutor Gu Beiwei. Your Majesty, the Crown Prince's first birthday is a joyous occasion. For the Crown Prince's sake, please spare General Bailey's life. There are still many things we don't understand and need to investigate in detail, Gu Beiwei said seriously. It was impossible for the Empress to plead for mercy. Aside from her, only the Grand Tutor had the guts to persuade him. Bailey Lixiang and Bailey Qiyu both grew nervous. The Bailey clan also looked over, their hearts thumping in fear. But Long Fei Yi said, Empress, the Crown Prince is young and doesn't know any better. You decide for the Crown Prince on this matter. Now, Bailey Lixiang was in complete despair. The rest of the Bailey clan also lost their strength. If Han Yunxi made the decision, it'd be strange if Han Yunxi didn't torture the Bailey clan to death. The Bailey clan was finished. Chapter 1248. What kind of decision would Han Yunxi make? If possible, she would demote the Bailey clan to commoners, but she couldn't be willful. As the Empress, she shouldered her responsibilities. As the head of the military, she shouldered her responsibilities as well. Moreover, Long Fei Yi had given her the power to decide, which made her even more responsible. Those who had their eyes on the Empress's seat and the head of the military only saw the Empress's power and glory. Had they ever considered the price they had to pay to sit by the Emperor's side? The Bailey clan couldn't fall. Once they did, Jianan's power would grow even stronger. There'd be unavoidable infighting in the military. The current balance of power in the imperial court would change as well. The north was still in turmoil, and all of Cloud Realm continent was still recovering from the war. It would be unwise to spend too much time and energy on infighting in the imperial court. Moreover, Bailey Yuanlong didn't just control the Bailey clan. He had countless soldiers under his command as well, all of whom were innocent. Han Yunshi had never thought of destroying the Bailey clan because she couldn't find anyone more suitable than them to lead the Central Army, much less control the Navy. Another important reason was that only the Bailey clan could fight against the Southern Army at the moment. Rather than destroy them and let the Southern Army show off, it was better to drive a wedge between the two sides. Just who was it that leaked the secret of the tableware? Most likely, the Bailey clan would suspect the Shao clan. She only needed to add fuel to the fire from the shadows to break the alliance between the Bailey and Shao clan. Once the Bailey clan bore a grudge against the Southern armies, it'd save her and Long Fei Yi a lot of trouble in the future. Of course, even if they didn't destroy the Bailey clan, they'd at least deal them a heavy blow. Only then would they hate the Shao clan even more. Your Majesty, the Crown Prince's first birthday is a joyous occasion. It's bad enough to see blood. As Qinxie sees it, let's lock up the people involved in the matter in the imperial prisons to await trial. As for how many of the Bailey clan members are accomplices, leave it to the justice courts to investigate. Deal with them as you see fit. Han Yunqi said seriously. Long Fei nodded. Men, take Bailey Li Xiang away. Bailey Li Xiang didn't resist, but she looked towards the Shao clan. Back then, they'd said they'd come together to persuade her, but the Shao clan still hadn't stepped forward. They must have been the ones who leaked the secret of the tableware. What a good Shao Dong. He actually dared to go back on his words and frame her and the Bailey clan. Even if she died, she would drag the Shao family down with her. Definitely. She had a lot of evidence in her hands. Bailey Li Xiang and Bailey Yuanlong were escorted away. Aside from Bailey Qiyu and his wife, the rest of the Shao family didn't dare to leave. After such a big thing happened, the Emperor and Empress must be in a bad mood. Everyone lowered their heads in fear. No one dared to make a sound. They all hoped that the banquet would end quickly. However, Han Yunshi sighed with emotion. Your Majesty, it seems that there are many people outside the palace who are dissatisfied with this concubine. If this concubine doesn't express herself, people might think that this concubine really doesn't care about Northern Li's disaster victims. As soon as Han Yunshi spoke, everyone went on guard. Even those who hadn't been afraid of her before and hadn't personally experienced her skills were now afraid. A few madams had planned to use this occasion to make trouble for Han Yunshi over the red packets. But now, they exchanged glances and shook their heads. They didn't dare act rashly. The madams decided to let the matter of the red packets go. Would Han Yunshi let it go as well? How does the Empress want to express herself? Long Fei asked. Your Majesty, the Crown Prince received many gifts today. Why don't we auction them off and donate all the proceeds to Northern Li's disaster victims? Han Yunshi asked seriously. Excellent. Long Fei naturally agreed. He cast a glance at Gu from the corner of his eyes and said, Then let's start from the auction of the number 7 tea house. Gu didn't have any interest in the battle in the imperial court. He was sitting lazily, waiting for the banquet to end. He was sleepy, hungry, and bored. But when he heard that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi wanted to bid for the number 7 tea house, he immediately became spirited and said loudly, What? Why? Does Prince Yu have an opinion about bidding for the Crown Prince's item? Long Fei Yi asked. Of course there is. Gu almost said that he had an opinion. Fortunately, Gu Beiwei stopped him in time to remind him that this was a public occasion and he must not be presumptuous. Of course not. Gu immediately changed his words, but his gaze was even more bitter and angry. He actually wanted to auction off the tea house that he had painstakingly prepared for a year to exchange for silver. Was Long Fei Yi lacking in silver? He turned back to look at the ministers below and coldly said, The value of the number 7 tea house is immeasurable. Benoit would like to see what price it can be auctioned for. Long Fei Yi said, The tea house and the number 7 tea house is deeply in Jean's heart. From Jean's point of view, it must be a sky-high price. Gu was even more bitter as he scolded in his heart. Long Fei Yi, it is deeply in your heart, and you still want to sell it off? Is there a problem with your head? Han Yunxi almost laughed out. She just started the auction, and Long Fei Yi was able to play it like this. He really was an expert, Long Fei Yi said that the number 7 tea house could be auctioned for a sky-high price. Then, the ministers who bid later would definitely not dare to bid at a low price. Otherwise, they would not give Long Fei Yi any face. Long Fei Yi also said that the tea house and the number 7 tea house was deeply in his heart. This meant that he really liked the number 7 tea house. Then, if someone bid for it, would they still dare to keep it for themselves? Wouldn't they continue to offer it? Moreover, there were already rumors in the imperial court that Long Fei Yi and Gu were not on good terms. Gu could only be conferred the title of prince because of his relationship with Mu Ling-er. In this way, if Gu offered a high price, capable people would definitely compete with Gu to curry favor with Long Fei Yi. In short, Long Fei Yi was blatantly trying to cheat the ministers of their money. Would Gu Qixiao refuse to bid? Of course not. As soon as the auction started, Gu directly said, 30 million taels of silver. This price shocked everyone so much that they did not dare to open their mouths. A few years ago, everyone was still very rich. However, after a few years of war, all the consortiums were affected and their strength was not as strong as before. Tang Li was actually eager to give it a try. He could not wait to help his brother suppress Gu's arrogance. Unfortunately, Ning Jing stopped him. The people of the Bailey family could still afford the price. However, they were all guilty now. Who would dare to be in the limelight? As for those ordinary ministers, they did not have money. Even if they had money, they would not dare to be so ostentatious. It would be terrible if they were misunderstood as corruption. Therefore, Long Fei Yi actually wanted to use Gu to cheat the Jiangnan Consortium of their money. The Jiangnan Consortium was the wealthiest. Long Fei Yi's Kangan Bank had already filled the imperial treasury with money. It could not be compared to the Jiangnan Consortium to support all kinds of expenses. As for the national treasury, it was far from the Jiangnan Consortiums. It was not an exaggeration to say that the Jiangnan Consortium was as rich as a country. The Great Qin's current financial situation could be summed up in one sentence. Great Qin's emperor and empress were not poor. Great Qin's nobles were not poor either. However, the national treasury was extremely poor. The Great Qin's national treasury had its first source of funds. It had taken the silver from Western Zhou, Tianning, Tian'an, and Northern Li's national treasuries, as well as the treasury of the central and southern regions. Although a starving camel was still bigger than a horse, in the past year, there had been reconstruction after the war and Northern Li's disaster relief. All kinds of expenses had been enormous. In this year, apart from Long Fei Yi, the Ministry of Revenue was probably the busiest. The Ministry of Revenue was in charge of the national treasury. Even if the emperor and empress wanted to use money from the national treasury, they had to go through the proper procedures. In the past year, all parts of the Great Qin Empire needed money. The central government departments needed money, and all the local officials had come to the Ministry of Revenue to beg for money. Fortunately, the construction of Yuning Palace and Tian, an imperial palace, had been funded by Long Fei Yi himself. Otherwise, the national treasury would have been empty by now. Not only in the past year, but also in the next few years, the national treasury would not be sufficient. The Minister of Revenue had calculated that according to the current situation of tax revenue, in the next 3 years, the national treasury would always be in a situation where its expenditure exceeded its income. Very soon, it would need the private treasury of the royal family to supplement it. The national treasury's income came from all kinds of taxes, mainly from agriculture and commerce. Agriculture accounted for a large portion of the income. Many merchants could still make use of the war to make a fortune, but agriculture was the industry that had suffered the most. Once war broke out, most of the able-bodied men would be enlisted as soldiers. How many people would be left to farm? Moreover, How many fields have been destroyed in the chaos of war? In the past year, 80 to 90% of the national treasury's silver and grain had come from the southern regions. Almost all of the other regions had given it away. It was precisely because the southern regions had contributed so much to the national treasury that the powerful officials and soldiers, they were the most arrogant and proud of themselves. Those aristocrats, aristocratic families, and meritorious generals all believed that they had given the Long Fei Yi enough support in the past to let Long Fei Yi have nothing to worry about. Now they had made the greatest contribution to the national treasury, helping other places rebuild after the war and helping Northernly tide over its difficulties. Thus, the Long Fei Yi should repay them by giving them the greatest power and glory. But if not for the Long Fei Yi's invasion of the south during Tianning's civil strife, would the central and southern regions have enjoyed so many years of peace? After all, the central and southern regions were fertile lands with thousands of kilometers of fertile land. Who in the world didn't covet these lands? If the Long Fei Yi had gone to the western regions or the northern regions during Tianning's civil strife, the central and southern regions would have been the first to fall into chaos. The Great Qin Empire's national treasury had close ties with the southern regions, but the imperial family's private storehouses were at odds with the southern financial groups. The imperial family's private storehouse was the imperial family's little storehouse. More accurately, it was the emperor's little storehouse. Generally speaking, the income of the imperial family's private storehouses came from monopolized industries like silk, tea leaves, salt, and mining. The imperial family's private storehouses spent a lot of money as well. Most of it was used to build palaces, pay for all the expenses of the imperial family, and support their relatives and nobles. For example, duchies and duchies were raised by the royal family for generations. The Great Qin imperial family's private storehouses were mostly supported by the Long Fei Yi's personal savings. Even now, there wasn't much income. That was because most of the silk, tea leaves, salt, and mining industries were still in the hands of the southern financial groups. The tax system had yet to be revised. Chapter 1249. The Great Qin's national treasury was poor, but the emperor wasn't poor, and neither were his ministers. If the national treasury didn't have enough money, the emperor's private coffers would have to pay for it. If there came a day when the emperor's private coffers couldn't support the enormous expenditure, then the emperor's private coffers would have to pay for it. When that time came, the financial groups would become even more arrogant. The reform of the tax system was imperative, but how could it be so easy to reform the tax system? Not long ago, the Ministry of Revenue had proposed raising the taxes on tea and tobacco in Jiangnan, but the tea and tobacco farmers in Jiangnan had immediately objected. It would take at least 2 to 3 years for the tax reform to be finalized. Without taxes, the national treasury and the imperial family's private coffers would have nowhere to draw their money. The financial groups in Jiangnan were opposed to the tax system, and they didn't take the initiative to donate. Moreover, they wanted to enjoy the salary and benefits of a noble title. Long Fei Yi had long since been annoyed. Han Yunxi had come up with the idea of bidding for the crown prince's birthday banquet, but Long Fei Yi wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to ruthlessly swindle those financial groups. Gu's bid of 30 million taels of silver was met with silence. Duke Ding Xiao unfurrowed his brows as if he was pondering something, while Xiao Dong of the southern military region repeatedly shot him meaningful glances. At first, Xiao didn't understand whether Xiao Dong wanted him to bid or not. However, when Xiao Dong looked at the 2 empty seats, he immediately understood what was going on. Not long ago, something had happened in the West. There was a leather merchant in the West who was known as Boss Chen. In the name of his daughter, he had donated a large number of leather vests to the disaster victims in Northernly to help them resist the cold. He had also donated 10 million taels of silver to the imperial capital, saying that he wanted to treat the construction workers to wine. The construction of the imperial capital required a large number of laborers. Some were transferred from the army, while others were recruited from the common folk. The soldiers in the army were paid a fixed salary, so they didn't have to be paid. However, The able-bodied men recruited from the common folk had to be paid on time. These wages naturally came from the imperial treasury. Tang Zijin was Long Fei Ye's uncle, so he loved the imperial treasury. He had taken a lot of money from the Tang clan to supplement the extra expenses. Boss Chun said that the 10 million was for the drinks, but it was actually a donation. Boss Chun made it sound quite nice, saying that the laborers were working hard for Great Qin, and that he was quite old and regretful that he could not personally participate. As such, he was willing to pay for the laborers to drink to show his sincerity and strength. As soon as this matter came out, Long Fei immediately conferred the title of County Duke to reward Boss Chun for his concern for the people. Xiaoan followed Xiao Dong's line of sight and looked at the 2 empty seats. He was really tempted by the matter of contacting Boss Chun. For a banquet of this scale, every seat had been arranged. How could there be any empty seats? The banquet was about to end, but the 2 seats on the secondary seats were still empty. What did the emperor mean? Could it be that, as everyone had guessed, the emperor intended to confer the title of Commandery Prince at the banquet? If he performed well today, would he be conferred a title like Boss Chun in the West? The Xiao family did not lack money, but they lacked status. The title of County Duke did not make Xiao feel proud. On the contrary, it made him feel inferior. He was already wavering, but under Xiao Dong's repeated urging, he finally opened his mouth. 50 million! As soon as Xiao said this, the crowd became even more silent. In fact, there were still some people who were hesitant. However, since Xiao had spoken, who would have the courage to compete with him? As expected, the Xiao clan head is generous, Long Fei praised. Xiao quickly stood up. This humble subject does not dare to be rash in front of your majesty. I just want to do my part for the victims of the disaster in Northern Li. If my Great Qin has a few more people like County Duke Chun and Guogong Ding who worry about the country, then Jun's hair will have fewer white hairs. Long Fei teased, his mood much better. Long Fei Yi was a man of few words, and Long Yi was even less. As soon as he said this, the people below could figure it out for a long time. As soon as Xiao heard the emperor mention County Duke Chun, he grew even more excited and determined to win the bid for number 7 tea house. Gu had no idea what County Duke Chun was talking about, much less why Long Fei Yi had left behind 2 secondary seats. He only knew that if Xiao dared to compete with Long Fei Yi for number 7 tea house, he was simply seeking death. 60 million taels, Gu said loudly. As soon as his voice trailed off, everyone was dumbfounded. This was far too shocking. Number 7 tea house didn't occupy a large area. At most, it could be considered a medium-sized tea house. In Cloud Realm Continent's current economic situation, 60 million taels was a sky-high price. Everyone knew that Gu was rich, but they never expected Gu to be so rich. Han Yunxi, Gu Beiyue, Tang Li, and the rest all looked towards Gu Qixiao, all of them thinking the same thing. If Xiao stopped raising the price, Gu Qixiao would become the biggest sucker in Long Fei's scheme this time. But to everyone's surprise, Xiao continued to bid without hesitation. 80 million. Xiao was still very polite. Your Highness Prince Yu, this official rarely has the chance to offer his heart to the Northern Li disaster victims. I hope you will let me win. Gu was already in a bad mood, so he didn't know how to write the word polite. He raised his eyebrows and looked disdainfully at him, saying loftily, "Let what? 90 million taels." Finally, the crowd couldn't hold back any longer and burst into an uproar. Even Han Yunxi and the rest didn't expect Gu to be so rich. But it wasn't strange when they thought about it. Gu was one of the 3 heavyweights of the 3-way black market. In his early years, he made huge profit from his business in medicinal herbs and tea houses. More importantly, Gu was different from the Long Fei Yi and the other financial groups. Gu was alone and had enough to feed his entire family. Compared to the Long Fei Yi and the other financial groups, his expenses should be the least. It had to be said that Xiao was very, very surprised. He couldn't help but reevaluate Gu, the only prince of Great Qin. 200 million taels wasn't a small sum. Xiao's resolute heart began to waver. If he continued to bid and used 90 million taels of silver to exchange for the title of Junwang, he would be more than happy to do so. However, he was worried that if he continued to compete with Gu, the price of the auction would rise to the point where it would go out of control. Of course, if it was within his means, he would still be willing to spend money to exchange for the title of Junwang. More importantly, he wasn't completely sure if the emperor would bestow him the title of prince if he was in a good mood. Shaolin hesitated. Is there anyone else who dares to compete with this prince? Gu asked arrogantly as he sat down carelessly. The crowd was silent. Shaolin and Xiao Dong looked at each other with furrowed brows. This emperor, Long Fei Yi, suddenly opened his mouth. For a moment, no one understood what he meant. Gu didn't understand either. 100 million. When Long Fei Yi said this, everyone understood what he meant. He was also participating in the auction. The money for disaster relief was allocated from the national treasury by the Ministry of Revenue. The imperial family's private treasury didn't pay for it. They only donated a few taels of silver in the name of the imperial family. Long Fei Yi's 100 million had to be taken from the imperial family's private treasury. It was said that the auction was free to bid and there was no need to be restrained by etiquette. However, who would dare to compete with the emperor? Shaolin definitely wouldn't dare. However, Gu definitely dared. 110 million. Gu immediately increased the price. 120 million. Long Fei Yi followed closely. 130 million. Gu wasn't willing to be outdone. 150 million. Long Fei Yi didn't budge an inch. The crowd was so silent that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. The smell of gunpowder between Long Fei Yi and Gu was getting stronger and stronger. It was almost to the point where they were about to start arguing. Everyone was terrified. However, not only did Gu not give in, he continued to press on. The price of the auction soared all the way to a jaw-dropping 230 million taels of silver. Han Yunxi and Gu Beiwei were stunned. This wasn't how things should be. Why were these two fellows fighting amongst themselves? If they continued to fight like this, where would Shaolin get the chance to perform? They would be scared off by Shaolin. 250 million. Long Fei Yi slammed the table. Han Yunxi sucked in a cold breath in shock. She knew that Long Fei Yi could afford it, but he shouldn't spend it so unjustly. He said that he was going to scam others today. Why did he scam his own private savings? Long Fei Yi slammed the table. Everyone was even more terrified. However, Gu was simply looking down on the emperor's prestige. He said, 260 million. In a moment, everyone looked at him. Previously, many people were dissatisfied with him being conferred the title of prince. However, after seeing his big spending, many people really admired him. Long Fei Yi didn't immediately increase the price like before. Instead, he looked at Gu coldly. The smell of gunpowder between the two of them could be smelled by anyone. Amidst the silence and tension, Shaolin suddenly stood up and said loudly, "Reporting to your majesty, this old subject boldly adds another 10 million, 270 million. This, Shaolin increased the price after Gu increased the price. This could be considered as competing with Gu, not with Long Fei Yi, right? Even so, he still used the word boldly. Long Fei Yi's eyes flashed with a sneer as he asked, Duke Ding is so sincere. Prince Yu, are you still going to increase the price? Gu felt that Long Fei Yi's words were strange, but he didn't think much about it. In any case, no matter what, the number 7 tea house couldn't fall into the hands of others. He didn't think much about it and increased the price again. At this moment, Gu Beiwei secretly tugged at his sleeve and murmured, Little Chi, that's enough. Enough? Gu instantly woke up and realized that this might be a trap. He was silent for a moment and immediately waved his hand dispiritedly. Enough, enough. Duke Ding's family has a lot of money. Everyone knows. This prince won't compete with him. Ha ha ha. Long Fei Yi laughed and seemed to be in a very good mood. He looked at the officials. Is there anyone else who wants to increase the price? Who would dare? Who would dare? No one made a sound. Shaolin looked at Long Fei Yi's extremely good mood, and his nervous heart relaxed a little. He had been struggling, pondering, and evaluating. In fact, he had almost given up. However, Seeing Gu provoking the emperor like that, he threw caution to the wind. As long as he suppressed Gu's price, the emperor would be happy. Chapter 1250. Long Feiye's laughter made Xiao and very satisfied. He was certain that he had made the right decision and looked forward to being conferred a higher title. Since no one is bidding, I announce that number 7 tea house will be won by Duke Ding, and all proceeds will be donated to the disaster areas in the north. Men, send the deed to Duke Ding. At Long Fei's words, Xiao hastened to speak up. Your Majesty, this official only wants to do what I can for Northern Li's disaster victims. Number 7 tea house is a gift from the Prince of Yu to the Crown Prince. This official doesn't dare to covet it. Xiao took the deed and personally presented it to the Crown Prince. Little Rei looked at his imperial father, then at his imperial mother, and then at Grand Tutor Gu Beiwei. He did not say anything for a long time. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi also did not say anything. Gu Beiwei only smiled at Rui. Your Highness, this is the Xiao family's sincerity. I hope your Highness will accept it. Xiao said respectfully. Little Rei looked at him with a serious expression, as if thinking about something. Xiao waited patiently with his back bent. Everyone looked on and sighed in their hearts. They were sighing about the Xiao family's wealth. The Great Qin Empire's treasury was so poor, but the Xiao family was rich. Wasn't the Xiao family's limelight a bit too much? They were sighing about how the Xiao family fawned on the Crown Prince. Everyone knew that the nobles in the south had their eyes on the empress and imperial concubine. The Xiao family's patriarch actually gave such a gift at the Crown Prince's birthday banquet. Xiao's thoughts were all on the second seat. He was immersed in his dream of being conferred the title of prince and did not think too much. Finally, little Rui reached out and took the deed. Little Rui said, Imperial father, I like him. Long Fei laughed. I like him too. I believe that the people of Northern Li will like him too. Men, write a decree to confer Duke Ding as a prince. His title is Ding. As soon as these words came out, everyone was even more shocked. Xiao was stunned at first, but then he quickly retreated and knelt down to express his gratitude. Just like that, Xiao was promoted from a duke to a royal prince. He immediately sat on one of the 2 empty seats in the secondary seat. It had to be said that everyone present, including many high-ranking officials of the southern faction, could not see through the current situation. After that, a few more items were auctioned off. Xiao, and Gu remained silent, leaving the opportunity to their ministers. Long Fei Yi had previously conferred 2 dukes. Originally, there were 4 grand dukes. Now, excluding Xiao, who had been promoted, there were 5 grand dukes in total. Looking at the last seat, everyone thought of the Bailey clan. Could it be that this seat was originally prepared for Bailey Yuanlong? Although the emperor had used various methods to cheat everyone of their money, the matter was definitely not as simple as that. There were many people who had donated 50 million yuan today, but the emperor had conferred 2 dukes. Why were there 2 of them instead of 1 or 3? After the birthday banquet, the Hunter Lane family would definitely be dealt with, and Great Qin's situation would most likely change. Now that the situation had changed, everyone's standpoint would change as well. Everyone's hearts were heavy because of their hunger. When the left and right congratulatory gifts were auctioned off, Long Fei Yi said, Come, list out today's gift list and the bidding price, and announce it to the world. The generosity of the ministers is a blessing for us, the Crown Prince, and even more so for the people of the north. Everyone's hearts were originally heavy, but when they heard this, the high-ranking officials of the Jiangnan and Bailey factions who had given ordinary gifts almost cried. They had originally thought that they could use the Empress extravagance to save some money. But now, things had turned out like this. How would the common people know everything that happened at the birthday banquet? Every detail? If this gift list was leaked, wouldn't they be scolded for being stingy and shabby? Scams. This was simply too much of a scam. No matter who it was, no matter how powerful they were or how rich their family was, it was impossible for them to stand in front of the Empress and Empress. When the birthday banquet ended, Mu Ling who had been hiding at the side, finally walked out. She knelt in the hall and presented a red envelope with both hands. Your Majesty, Empress, Your Highness the Crown Prince, Ling, would like to offer a token of appreciation to the disaster victims. This is a red envelope bestowed by Her Majesty the Empress during the New Year. It is the first red envelope given by Her Majesty the Empress. Ling originally kept it as a souvenir, but now I offer it together with the bidding price. Ling hopes that this token of appreciation can warm the people of the North. Gu was puzzled. When did this girl, Mu Ling, become so eloquent? How long had it been since he last saw her? Had she really grown up? How much money could a red envelope hide? However, when she said this, it really was a heavy and meaningful token of appreciation. Haha, Your Majesty, our family's Ling has grown up. Han Yunqi laughed. The word "our family" elevated Mu Ling's status to such a high level that no one dared to look down on her. At this moment, the madams in the hall exchanged glances. After all, they'd all brought empty red envelopes today. Originally, they planned to slap the Empress in the face. But after Bailey Li Xiang was imprisoned, they'd all restrained themselves and didn't dare to be impudent. Mu Ling had offered up her red envelope. So after the banquet, the other madams and young misses would surely follow suit. What are they going to do with their empty red envelopes? Sitting next to Xiao Dong, Madame Xiao grew anxious. Master, what should we do? We'll talk when we get back. Xiao Dong muttered unhappily. He was still immersed in the joy of Xiao and's coronation. So how could he care about something as trivial as a red envelope? Just like that, the Crown Prince's birthday banquet ended with Mu Ling donating a red envelope. After Chang Fei Yi and the others left, the other ministers followed suit. Outside the palace, a group of ministers surrounded Xiao and to congratulate him. There was no lack of supporters of Bailey Yuanlong among them. This made Bailey Yuanlong's two trusted aides furious. They went to the Bailey estate that very night to complain. Bailey Yuanlong was still unconscious. Bailey Mingxiang's eyes were red from crying as he personally stood guard. Bailey Qiyu came out to greet the guests. By the time Bailey Qiyu returned, it was already midnight. Mingxiang, go beg esteemed Empress. Before Bailey Qiyu could finish, Bailey Mingxiang cut him off. I'm not going. You'll have to clean up your own mess. Esteemed Empress has always treated the Xiao family well. Brother, father, and eldest sister are muddle-headed, but are you going to follow suit? The invitation to the Crown Prince's birthday banquet was for her father, brother, and family members. No one was specifically named. She had the right to attend, and her eldest sister had urged her to come. But she purposely waited for the banquet to start before entering the city. How could she not want to attend? How could she not want to see the Emperor and Empress, the Little Master, the Grand Tutor, and Miss Linger? But she didn't go in the end and stayed at home. She could participate in the bustle of the past, but the bustle of the present had nothing to do with her. Being able to survive was the greatest bustle of her life. Bailey Qiyu was stunned. He'd never seen his sister lose her temper before. Mingxiang, you know father and eldest sister's temper. Can I stop them? Bailey Qiyu asked helplessly. You know His Majesty's temper too. What can I say? Bailey Mingxiang asked. Go beg esteemed Empress. As long as she's willing to show mercy, His Majesty will definitely show mercy. For Bailey Qiyu and the entire Bailey family, Bailey Mingxiang was their only hope. Sister, take it as your brother begging you. Go to the palace now. It'll be too late if His Majesty goes to court tomorrow morning. Bailey Mingxiang shook his head. You really don't understand her. Brother, esteemed Empress won't see me. You. Bailey Qiyu was furious. Sister, did you know that Shaolin was made of Junwang? We've been set up by the Xiao family this time. Go tell esteemed Empress that the Xiao family had a part to play in inciting public anger. It was the Xiao family who instigated eldest sister. Bailey Mingxiang was expressionless and didn't move from her spot. Bailey Qiyu was about to go crazy from anxiety. At this moment, Bailey Yuanlong suddenly woke up and stared blankly at Bailey Qiyu. You, what did you say? Father's awake. Bailey Mingxiang wanted to take his pulse, but Bailey Yuanlong waved her hand away. Maida Junwang. Who? Who was Maida Junwang? Bailey Yuanlong stared fixedly at his son. Although Bailey Chiyu didn't want to say it, he had to under his father's gaze. Father, His Majesty auctioned off the Crown Prince's gifts. Shaoan spent a lot of money to please His Majesty, so His Majesty made him a Junwang on the spot. Bailey Yuanlong was stunned. After a while, he muttered, Shaoan. Shaoan sat in the secondary seat. And who else? Father, of the two empty secondary seats, one was given to Shaoan, and the other has always been empty. Bailey Yuanlong seemed to have thought of something. His eyes widened, and he suddenly cried out, Master, this old official was wrong. Wrong. This old official. Before he could finish, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes widened, and his hand fell to his side as he breathed his last. Father. Father. Bailey Mingxiang and Bailey Chiyu didn't expect this. Bailey Mingxiang threw herself at him and wailed, Father. Father. Bailey Chiyu fell heavily to his knees, completely stupefied. Father is gone. Bailey Chiyu didn't know how long he remained in a daze. Finally, he got up and ordered a servant to report the death to the palace. At this moment, Han Yunxi and Long Fei Ye's group had just eaten supper and hadn't gone to bed yet. Gu had lost a bet to Gu, but he was very indignant and insisted that Gu Beiwe had cheated by teaching Ru'er how to hold the seal in advance. No one knew whether Gu Beiwe had taught Ru'er or not. Gu held Ru'er in his arms and asked several times, but Ru'er refused to say. Just as Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were about to make a bet, Tang Li and Ning Jing were about to make a bet, and Mu Ling was especially interested in making a bet as well. Thus, Han Yunxi ordered for the 66 items to be brought over, and Ru'er had to pick them again. Ru'er secretly rolled his eyes at his imperial mother. Only the heavens knew what he was thinking. However, he was very cooperative. Since it was a new bet, everyone chose again, but the stakes didn't change. While Ru'er stared blankly at the 66 items, the adults each wrote down their own guesses on a piece of paper and handed it to Granny Zhao. Mu Ling was a newcomer. She glanced at Chi Brother and said with a smile, Chi Brother, I want to bet with you too. Gu was suspicious. It wasn't strange that this girl didn't pester him in the hall. He thought that she would immediately pester him after returning and ask him why he ran away, but she didn't. Moreover, her attitude was as if nothing had happened. Actually, Mu Linger's attitude only made Gu Qishao uneasy. Chi Brother, do you dare? Mu Linger urged. Chapter 1251. Gu was very uneasy that Mu Ling didn't pursue the matter of him running away from Medical City. If Mu Ling really didn't pursue the matter, he would have an easy time. He was afraid. He was afraid that Mu Ling had some tricks up her sleeve. Chi Brother, you don't dare to bet with me? Mu Linger laughed. What are we betting on? Gu asked. What does Chi Brother want to bet on? Mu Linger asked. Up to you. Gu was on his guard. Mu Linger giggled as she drew closer to Gu Qishao's ear. It was unclear what she said in a low voice, but Gu Qishao froze. Mu Linger stepped back and asked, Do you dare? Gu hesitated, but he still agreed. No problem. If you lose, you can't go back on your word. Mu Ling chuckled and went to the side to write down her guess. She immediately folded it and handed it to Granny Zhao. No one knew what Gu and Mu Linger's bet was, but when they saw Gu's serious expression, they felt that Mu Linger's bet wouldn't be simple. Just like that, the seven of them formed four bets. At this time, was still struggling in front of a pile of things. He won a lot of things. How should he choose? Han Yunxi and the others sat around and watched. They were all calm and relaxed, as if they could afford to win or lose. On the other hand, Granny Zhao stood on the other side of the 66 items, facing the Crown Prince. She didn't participate in the bet, but she was very nervous. She carefully flipped open the booklet and read it again. She couldn't remember what the masters were betting on. In these four bets, Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi played a game. Han Yunxi bet that Ru'er would choose the abacus, while Long Fei Yi bet that Ru'er would choose the hidden weapon. The loser had to eat the winner's noodles. Tang Li and Ning Jing played around. Tang Li bet that Rui would choose the account book while Ning Jing bet that Rui would choose the sword. The winner would control the finances of the couple. Gu Beiwei and Gu played one round. Gu Beiwei bet that Rui would choose the seal while Gu bet that Rui would choose the gold ingot. The loser had to serve the winner for a day. Gu and Mu Ling played one round. As for what Mu Ling was betting on Rui's choice, Granny Zhao couldn't help but laugh. At this moment, Rui turned to look at Han Yunxi with a confused expression. What? No, you can take as many as you want. Take as many as you like, Han Yunxi said hurriedly. Rui immediately grinned. He turned back to the pile of things and began to pick carefully. Everyone's eyes immediately gathered on him. Suddenly, Rui squatted down. There was an account book, an abacus, and a sword beside him. Han Yunxi, Ning Jing, and Tang Li were all nervous. Rui suddenly grabbed the abacus. Han Yunxi rejoiced and flashed a provocative smile at Long Fei, incomparably happy. If it wasn't for the fact that she couldn't disturb Rui, she would have laughed out loud. As expected of her biological son, she won the first thing he grabbed. Long Fei glanced at Han Yunxi. He was still very calm. Rui choosing the account book didn't mean that Han Yunxi had won. Rui could still choose the hidden weapon. Han Yunxi was overjoyed. Who knew that Rui would throw the abacus back when he felt that it was meaningless? This, Han Yunxi's smile froze. Long Fei turned around and looked deeply at Han Yunxi. He was clearly mocking her. Han Yunxi wanted to grab Rui and kiss him. Was he playing with her? Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were flirting. Ning Jing and Tang Li were both nervous because Rui picked up the account book and sword at the same time. Tang Li was betting on the account book while Ning Jing was betting on the sword. How could they not be nervous? Rui squatted there and looked at the account book seriously. Tang Li stroked Tang's little head with anticipation. Rui put down the sword and walked towards Granny Zhao with the account book in both hands. Tang Li's smile widened. He whispered to Ning Jing, "My brother knows how to look at account books since he was young. He must have learned this from him." Ning Jing was resentful and didn't even bother to look at him. Who knew that Rui would throw the account book at Granny Zhao's feet and say no? Everyone was stunned at first and couldn't help but laugh. Only Tang Li's face darkened. Other children picked what they liked. It seemed that Rui picked what he didn't like and threw it out. Han Yunxi patted her chest subconsciously. She was very glad that her son put the abacus back. When Rui returned to the pile of things, everyone became nervous again. But it was a different kind of nervousness. Previously, they were looking forward to Rui using their own things. Now, they couldn't wait for Rui to stay away from those things. Rui also walked over to the pile of toys and pastries. He frowned and looked at them with disdain. He sat down cross-legged and waved at Tang. "Tang, do you want to eat?" he asked in a childish voice. Little Tang was a little sleepy. When she heard the word eat, she immediately perked up and her eyes lit up. "Eat." She nodded vigorously. Tang Li and Ning Jing were particularly helpless. Little Tang had never been interested in other people's things. No matter how fun or delicious it was, she didn't care. Why was she not immune to Rui's things? "Come," Rui said seriously. Little Tang immediately jumped out of her father's arms. Rui ran to the side and dragged a small bamboo basket in front of Tang. He still said seriously in a childish voice, "Put it in." Was he letting little Tang take as much as she wanted and take whatever she wanted? "Thank you, little brother." Tang was happy. "I don't like you, little brother." Rui ignored her and lowered his head to pick other things. Tang took the food first and put all kinds of pastries in the basket before putting in the toys. No one chose the pastries or toys. Everyone knew that Rui didn't like these two things. Therefore, no one paid much attention to Tang and focused on Rui. Rui had already thrown away several things, including some copper coins, rulers, and ornaments. Suddenly, Tang picked up the seal and asked, "Little brother, this is it for me?" As soon as she said that, Everyone immediately looked over. Ning Jing's face turned pale. Gu was the first to laugh out loud. Han Yunxi also couldn't stop laughing. If this happened at today's birthday banquet, the Tang sect would probably be finished. However, in private, Han Yunxi didn't mind at all. Long Fei Ye's calm expression didn't seem to mind either. However, Ning Jing was also frightened. She was about to reprimand them when Han Yunxi stopped her and whispered, "It's just a game. Let them be." Tang Li also felt that it was inappropriate. However, Long Fei Yi looked over and said faintly, "Let's see what Rayer wants." "It's fine." With Long Fei Ye's words, Tang Li and Ning Jing felt more at ease. However, they didn't dare to completely relax. What if Rayer didn't give it to her and Tang insisted? She was still a child. Although she was taught well, her nature couldn't be suppressed. How could she be very sensible? Little Tang held up the seal. Ruier looked over suspiciously. When he saw the seal, he immediately ran over. "No, not giving. Not giving." He said, "Not giving" 3 times in a row, showing how determined he was. He ran in front of Tang, but didn't directly snatch the seal. Instead, he reached out and said, "Give it to me." Little Tang was frightened by Ruier's aggressiveness. She quickly handed the seal to him and said 3 times in a row, "No, no, no." She didn't want it. Long Fei Yi laughed. Everyone else was amused and roared with laughter. Tang Li and Ning Jing's worried hearts finally settled down. Little Tang also had a backbone. She dragged a basket of food and toys and happily returned to her father's side. She didn't want anything else from Ruier. Ruier put the seal back and began to pick other things. "Looks like I won." Gu Beiwei chuckled softly. "Haha, I might not lose," Gu said disdainfully. As soon as he said that, Ruier picked up the gold ingot that Gu bet. Seeing this, Gu Qixiao's eyes widened. Mu Linger grew nervous as well and held her breath. The gold ingot was so big that Ruier couldn't hold it with one hand. He had to hold it with both hands. How could this child not love money? Gu murmured. His father had cheated so much money from the officials. How could he not love money? How could Ruier not love money? He didn't recognize the banknotes, but he recognized the shiny gold ingot. He held the gold ingot and ran to Han Yunxi. "Mother, for you." Han Yunxi was amused. "Ruier, you don't want it." "No, it's for Mother," answered seriously. He stole his mother's banknotes, but gave her the gold ingot. This child really made people laugh and cry. When he grew up and became sensible, how would he react when he found out about the embarrassing things that happened to him when he was young? Han Yunxi accepted it graciously and stroked Ruier's head. She didn't forget to kiss him and said seriously, "Son, if you see gold in the future, you have to give it to Mother, okay?" Ruier nodded immediately. "Okay." Gu looked at Han Yunxi and said seriously, "Poison girl, you can't cheat a child of his money like this. Quickly return it to him." Han Yunxi really wanted to return the gold ingot to Ruier, but he didn't want it and stuffed it back to her. "Ruier, you really don't want it?" Han Yunxi asked seriously. "No." Ruier was serious. Han Yunxi looked at Gu. Without her saying more, Gu was already listless. Gu hugged his knees and sat sideways on the chair, staring at Ruier resentfully. He glanced at Mu Ling, who was sitting not far away. He might have lost, but that didn't mean Mu Linger would win either. His scalp tingled at the thought of Mu Linger's bet. He prayed that Mu Linger would lose too. Ruier started picking out the things he didn't want again. He picked out a lot and kept a lot. Han Yunxi's abacus, Chang Fei Ye's hidden weapons, Ning Jing's sword, and Gu Beiwei's seal were all left behind. There were also some scriptures, the 4 treasures of the study, and porcelain. Granny Zhao looked on helplessly. "How is this a lottery? Ruier, you want all these things?" Han Yunxi sighed inwardly. So her son was also a greedy person. Ruier didn't answer immediately. He looked around and picked up the abacus again. Han Yunxi was stunned. "You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.